Welcome back to At Lena Romantasy Collection. We are diving back into the world of the Alpha King and his brave little savior. But before we unleash the next chapter, I need you to do me a huge favor. Smash that like button, make sure you are subscribed with notifications turned on so you never miss a beat, and drop a comment down below telling me where in the world you are listening from today. Are you in New York, Canada, London? Let the pack know. Now, if you missed the first 30 chapters, or just need a refresher, here is exactly what happened in The Alpha King Was Betrayed. We met Rhys, the Alpha King of the North, powerful, arrogant, untouchable, until his own brother Gideon betrayed him in cold blood, selling him to ruthless hunters to steal the throne. Rhys was stripped of his power, bound in burning silver chains, and thrown into a dungeon to rot. For months, he was tortured, starving, and waiting to die. The Alpha was broken. Then came Alara, a 10-year-old human orphan living in the shadows of the Hunter's fortress. She didn't see a monster. She saw a man in pain. Risking her life every single night, she sneaked into his cell, bringing him water, food, and hope. But she gave him something more important than bread. She gave him freedom. With nothing but a rusted file and impossible courage, Alara spent weeks sawing through the iron bonds of the Alpha King. When the hunters finally caught them, they thought they had won. They thought the king was weak. They were wrong. With one hand free and a heart full of rage, Rhys fought back to protect the girl. And in a moment of pure adrenaline-fueled bravery, Alara broke the final chain. The beast was unleashed. The hunters were destroyed, and Rhys, now free but wounded, scooped up the child who saved him and vanished into the tunnels beneath the fortress. They are out of the cage, but they are not out of danger. Gideon is hunting them. The war has just begun, and Rhys is about to make a choice that will change both their lives forever. Are you ready to see what happens next? Grab your headphones, settle in, and let's dive into Chapter 31.
The howl that had shattered the hunter's resolve still echoed in my ears, a vibrant, thrumming promise of violence that made the dust dance in the shafts of gray light filtering through the arrow slits. I stood near the hearth, the makeshift club still in my hand, watching Alara. She wasn't cowering. In fact, now that the immediate threat of the crossbows was gone, she was dusting soot off her tattered dress with an air of immense annoyance, as if the hunters were merely rude guests who had tracked mud onto a clean floor. "Well," she huffed, kicking a loose stone toward the door where the men had fled. "They were rude and loud." I stared at her, blinkered by adrenaline. "Alara, they were killers, mercenaries." "They were bullies with bad aim," she corrected, pointing a small dirt-stained finger to the iron bolt embedded in the stone wall. "And they ran away from a noise. Cowards. If I had a crossbow, I wouldn't have missed." Before I could process her surprisingly critical assessment of our would-be executioners, the heavy oak door creaked open. Caleb filled the frame. My beta, my brother in all ways but blood. He was in his human form, breathless, his leather armor torn from a hasty shift, sweat slicking his dark skin. A heavy broadsword was strapped to his back. His eyes, wild and gold-rimmed, swept the room, landing on me. "Rhys," he breathed, the name carrying a weight of disbelief. He took a step forward, the chainmail beneath his tunic clinking. "The pack, we felt the severing. I thought Gideon had—" "He tried," I rasped, the pain in my shoulder throbbing now that the adrenaline was fading. "He sold me, Caleb, to skin hunters." Caleb's face twisted into a mask of pure fury, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "I will mount his head on a pike." "Get in line," Alara piped up from beside the hearth. Caleb jumped, his hand flying to the hilt of his sword. He looked down at her as if a rock had just spoken. "Who is this?" "I'm Alara," she said, stepping forward and extending a grimy hand with the imperious dignity of a queen. "And you're late. He's bleeding, you know. While you were howling to the moon outside, he got shot." Caleb looked from her small hand to my face, bewildered. "Rhys? Is this a hostage?" I let out a sound that was half laugh, half groan, sliding down to sit against the cold stone wall. "No, Caleb, she's the reason I'm standing here. She broke the chains. Caleb's eyes widened. He looked at the girl, this tiny, fragile human thing, with a newfound respect and perhaps a bit of fear. Ilara, sensing she had the upper hand, pointed a stern finger at my shoulder. "Fix him. You're the backup, right? Do your job." I saw the corner of Caleb's mouth twitch. "Backup?" he muttered. "I am the Beta of the Northern Legion, little girl." "Beta, Alpha, Omega." She waved her hand dismissively, thinking these were just fancy soldier titles. "Whatever. Do you have healing salves or linen? We're out of dried beef." I leaned my head back, feeling the exhaustion crash over me, but a warmth bloomed in my chest. She was bossing around a warrior 10 times her strength with an ounce of fear. She was impossible. "She has a point, Caleb," I murmured, wincing as the salve stung. "I need binding, and we need to move. Gideon's trackers won't be as easily spooked as human hunters." Caleb snapped into action, pulling a roll of linen and a small jar of pungent salve from his belt pouch. As he worked on my shoulder, Ilara hovered, critiquing his technique. "That's too tight," she observed, squinting at the bandage. "You're going to turn his arm purple. Do you want it to fall off?" Caleb looked at me, exasperated. "Is she always like this?" "Only when she's right," I murmured, wincing as the salve stung. Ilara gave a satisfied nod, crossed her arms, and tapped her bare foot on the stone. We were alive. We were together. But as I looked at her brave, fiery face, I knew the hardest part wasn't the escape. It was what came next.
Chapter 32. The descent from the watchtower was less of a march and more of a tactical retreat. Caleb had brought 2 other enforcers, Marco and Silas, who waited at the tree line with 5 horses. They were massive beasts, destriers bred for war, their breath misting in the cold mountain air. When Marco and Silas saw me, they dropped to one knee, heads bowed in absolute submission, their fists pressed to the damp earth. Ilara stopped dead in her tracks. "Why are they doing that?" she whispered loudly. "Did they drop something?" "It's a sign of respect," I explained quietly, hauling myself up. My shoulder burned, but the silver had been removed, and my alpha healing was already knitting the flesh back together. "It looks uncomfortable," she noted. She walked up to Marco, a brute of a man with a scar running through his eyebrow and a massive battle axe strapped to his back. "You can stand up now. The ground is wet. You'll get mud on your knees." Marco looked up, terrified, his eyes darting to me for permission. I gave a curt nod. Marco stood, towering over her, his armor creaking. Ilara didn't flinch. She just squinted at him. "Do you have any food?" The tall one, she pointed at Caleb, only had bandages. Marco blinked, then slowly reached into his saddlebag and produced a wrapped chunk of hard cheese. Yes, little miss." She took it with a solemn nod. "Thank you. You're my favorite now." Caleb sighed, moving to my side to support my weight. "She's going to be a problem, Reese. She has no fear instinct. She speaks to warriors as if they are stable boys." "She saved my life because she lacks a fear instinct," I replied, watching her tear into the cheese. We moved to mount the horses. I refused help, pulling myself into the saddle of my black stallion, Obsidian. However, Ilara stood by the stirrup, looking up at the massive animal with skepticism. "I can walk," she announced. "That thing is too high, and it looks bitey." "It's a horse, Ilara," I said, leaning down and extending my hand, "and we need speed. Come." "I have legs," she argued, though her voice wobbled. "I hiked up here." "I know you did, but my back is cold," I said, offering her a tired smirk. "You'd be doing me a favor." She hesitated, chewing her lip. Then, with a small huff of surrender, she grabbed my arm. With Marco's help boosting her, she settled in front of me on the saddle. She was impossibly light. It made my chest ache. How had she survived on scraps for so long? As I spurred the horse into a trot, she leaned back against my chest. "If you drop me," she yelled over the wind, "I'm telling the big guy with the axe that you're clumsy." "Noted," I said dryly, wrapping my cloak around her shivering form. We rode hard. Ilara, energized by the cheese and the thrill of the ride, began a running commentary on the forest. She pointed out squirrels, critiqued the moss distribution, and asked endless questions about Caleb's haircut. "It looks like a bristly brush. Did he lose a bet with a barber?" "It's a warrior's cut," I explained, feeling a rumble of laughter in my chest for the first time in years. "It looks scratchy," she whispered. For a brief hour, the forest wasn't a kill zone. It was just a ride. But reality crashed back in when Caleb rode up beside me, his voice low enough that human ears couldn't catch it over the thundering hooves. "Gideon has seized the citadel," Caleb murmured, his face grim. "He's telling the High Council you abdicated, that you were weak. He has the mages' support. Retaking the throne, it's going to be a war, Reese, a bloody civil war." I tightened the grip on the reins, my arm brushing Ilara's small shoulder. She was humming a tuneless song, oblivious to the fact that she was riding with a deposed king marching toward a massacre. "I know," I said, my voice cold steel. "And in a war, Caleb, there is no place for a child." Chapter 33. We reached the extraction point at dusk, a hidden network of limestone caves used by our scouts during the Great Wars. It was damp, dark, and smelled of wet earth and bat guano, but it was defensible. Inside, Marco and Silas stood guard at the entrance, while Caleb lit a resin torch. The flickering orange light danced on the damp walls. I lifted Ilara down from the horse. She stretched, her back cracking audibly. "Nice cave," she deadpanned, looking at the dripping stalactites. "Very rustic. Needs tapestries." "It's a bunker, Ilara," I said, sinking onto a wooden crate. The exhaustion was bone deep now. "Not a palace." "A bunker needs snacks," she countered, crossing her arms. "And maybe a door that isn't just a hole in a rock." She walked over to Caleb, who was unrolling a parchment map on a flat stone. "Hey, Bristles, where are we going? Is there roast chicken?" Caleb looked up, looking pained. "Bristles?" He looked at me. "Reese, please." "She likes you," I lied. "I tolerate him," she corrected. "He has the cheese." While she pestered Caleb, I closed my eyes, letting my senses expand. I could feel the vibrations of the earth, the distant heartbeat of the forest. But mostly, I felt her. It was faint, like a tether made of spider silk connecting my core to hers. The mate bond. It was dormant, waiting for her to come of age, but it was there. My wolf knew it. He watched her with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Mine, safe, protect. But how could I protect her? "Reese," Caleb's voice was serious now. He had moved away from Ilara, who was busy trying to braid the mane of Marco's horse while the giant warrior watched nervously. "We need to talk strategy." I opened my eyes. "Speak." "We can't take her to the northern stronghold," Caleb said bluntly. "Gideon has spies everywhere. If he finds out you have a human weakness, a child you care for, he won't just kill her, he'll use her. He'll torture her to break you again." The image of Ilara back in chains, back in that cell, made my vision go red. A low snarl ripped from my throat. Marco's horse whinnied in fear. Ilara just paused mid-braid and looked over. "Quiet down, Wolfie, you're scaring the pony." I took a deep breath, forcing the wolf back. Caleb was right. "She has no one, Caleb," I said, my voice rough. "She's an orphan. She lived in the vents of a hunter fortress." "Which makes her a ghost. That's good. We can use that. We can send her to the Northern Territories, the sanctuary of St. Valeria. It is a convent school across the sea. Shifters do not go there. Gideon's influence does not reach there." "Send her away?" The words tasted like ash. "I promised I would find her. I promised I wouldn't leave her." "You found her. Now you have to save her. Reese, look at her." I looked. Ilara was currently lecturing the horse on standing still. She was small. She was fragile. She was human. In my world of claws and magic, she was nothing but a target. "If she stays with me," I whispered, "she dies. Yes, she dies. And you lose the war because you'll be too busy guarding her to fight Gideon." The truth was a blade in my gut. I had to break my own heart to save hers. "Make the arrangements," I ordered, my voice hollow. "The sanctuary. A generous endowment. Gold, enough for a noblewoman. But she can never know it comes from me." "Why?" I said, watching her laugh as the horse nuzzled her. "Because if she knows, she'll try to come back, and I can't let her do that. Not until I've killed Gideon and wiped every threat from the face of the earth." Chapter 34. The carriage Caleb had arranged, a nondescript black coach with heavy curtains, idled on the old merchant road just outside the forest. It was midnight. The mist swirled around the horse's hooves like spectral fingers. Ilara stood by the open door, clutching a small leather satchel Caleb had procured. She looked small, so incredibly small against the backdrop of the dark woods. She looked between me and the carriage, her brow furrowed. The uptightness was gone, replaced by a trembling uncertainty. "You're not coming," she stated. It wasn't a question. She was too smart for that. I knelt before her in the mud, ignoring the damp seeping into my trousers. I wanted to grab her, to pull her onto my horse and ride until we found the edge of the world. But I was a king, and kings made sacrifices. "I cannot come, Ilara," I said softly. "Where I am going, there are monsters, worse than the ones in the fortress." "I can fight monsters," she insisted, her voice hitching. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the rusted file she had kept. "I have my sword." I smiled, a cracked, painful thing. I gently took the file from her hand. "You are the bravest warrior I have ever known, but this battle is for wolves. You have a different mission." "What mission?" she demanded, tears welling in her large eyes. "Learning to sew? Eating porridge? That's boring." "Your mission is to live," I said fiercely, gripping her small shoulders. "To grow up, to be safe. You saved my life, Ilara. Do not let that be in vain. If you stay here, you will be hunted. If you go there, you will be free." "I don't want to be free," she whispered, a tear finally escaping and tracking through the dirt on her cheek. "I want to be with you. You're my friend." The word shattered me. Friend. She had no idea. I reached into my tunic and pulled out a small object. It was a heavy silver coin, old and worn, stamped with the crest of the northern wolf, a roaring head against a mountain. It wasn't magical, just rare, a family heirloom I had managed to hide during my captivity. I pressed it into her hand. "Take this." She looked at it, sniffing. "Is it money? Can I buy a pony?" I chuckled, wiping the tear from her cheek with my thumb. "It is a promise. Keep it safe. Look at it when you are lonely, and know that as long as you have this, I am thinking of you." "You promise?" she asked, her voice small. "I swear it," I vowed. "Listen to me, Ilara. I have to go away to fix my kingdom. It might take a long time. You might grow up. You might forget me." "I won't," she argued fiercely. "I have a memory like a really smart dragon." "Good." I leaned my forehead against hers for a brief second, breathing in her scent, rain, pine, and innocence. I seared it into my memory to sustain me through the bloody years ahead. "Be brave, little savior. Give them hell." I pulled back and nodded to the driver, a cloaked figure who knew better than to speak. "Wait!" She threw her arms around my neck, hugging me tightly. "Don't die, Wolfie. If you die, I'll be really mad." "I won't die," I promised. "Now go." She climbed into the carriage. She didn't look back as the door closed. She pressed her hand and the silver coin against the window glass. I stood there, watching the carriage fade into the mist, taking my heart with it. Caleb stepped up beside me, his hand on his sword hilt. "It's done. She's safe." I stared at the empty road, the coldness returning to my chest, filling the void she left behind. The softness vanished. The Alpha King returned. "Good," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "Now summon the pack. We have a war to start." Chapter 35. 12 years later. The stone balcony of the royal citadel overlooked the capital city, a sprawling maze of slate roofs, cobblestone streets, and smoking chimneys. I stood with a goblet of dark wine in my hand, staring at the banners snapping in the wind. They bore my crest, the roaring wolf. The face reflecting in the dark liquid was harder than the one that had left the woods 12 years ago. The scar on my shoulder had faded to a white line, but the scars on my soul had only calcified. I was Rice, the Alpha King, the Conqueror. It had taken 5 years to kill Gideon. 5 years of bloody, brutal warfare involving steel and magic. I had hunted him across the territories, dismantling his armies until I finally cornered him in the very ravine where he had betrayed me. I didn't give him a trial. I gave him the mercy of a quick death by my own claws. The 7 years since then had been spent rebuilding. My kingdom was secure. My vaults were full. My power was absolute. I was feared by my enemies and respected by my allies. And I was completely, utterly alone. My king. I didn't turn. I knew the voice. "Report, Caleb." Caleb walked onto the balcony. He had gray at his temples now, wearing the velvet doublet of a high lord rather than leather armor, but he moved with the same lethal grace. He placed a rolled parchment on the stone balustrade. The quarterly report from the human territories. The subject, that's what we called her. To name her was to make her real, and to make her real was to risk exposing her. I picked up the parchment, breaking the wax seal. I didn't read the details of the harvest or the trade routes. I scanned for the name. Ilara. "She left the sanctuary 4 years ago," Caleb said quietly. "She refused the final endowment. She disappeared into the capital's lower district." My hand tightened on the parchment, crumpling it slightly. "Disappeared? You said you had eyes on her." "We do," Caleb assured me, "but she is stubborn. She works as a serving wench at a tavern near the docks, and recently she took a second position, cleaning staff at the royal laundry." A growl rumbled deep in my chest. My wolf paced in the cage of my mind, agitated. Mate, suffering, provide. "A serving wench," I murmured, the glass goblet turning sour in my mouth. "She should be a lady. I sent enough gold to buy a county." "She returned it, Rice," Caleb reminded me. "Every coin. She said she wouldn't live on charity from a man who abandoned her." Abandoned. The word was a lash. A ghost, that's what I was to her. A childhood memory she had probably convinced herself was a hallucination. "She is struggling," Caleb continued, his voice hesitant. "The winter has been hard. Firewood is expensive. She is thin, Rice." The glass goblet in my hand shattered. Wine and shards fell to the stone floor. Blood welled on my palm, but I didn't feel it. "The equinox ball," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "The laundry staff. They are being brought in to assist the kitchens, are they not?" Caleb stiffened. "Rice, no. You haven't seen her in 12 years. We agreed until the Southern Rebellion was fully crushed." "The rebels are crushed," I snapped, turning to face him. "Gideon is dead. The kingdom is secure." "She doesn't know you," Caleb warned. "To her, you're just the terrifying Alpha King who sits on the Iron Throne. If you approach her—" "I won't approach her," I lied. I looked at the horizon, imagining the fiery 10-year-old girl who had scolded a warrior. "I promised I would find you." Tonight, the ghost would become real, and I had a feeling my carefully constructed control was about to shatter. Chapter 36. The High Council Chamber was a cavernous hall of black stone and velvet banners, heated by a roaring fire that could roast a whole ox. 6 merchant lords sat around the heavy oak table, sweating in their silk doublets, their faces pale in the flickering torchlight. I sat at the head of the table, fingering the stem of my goblet. I didn't drink. I just watched them. "Your Grace," Lord Vance stammered, wiping his brow with a lace handkerchief, The tax levy you propose, it is aggressive. You ask for 50% of the grain shipments from the southern borders. That is practically thievery. I didn't blink. I didn't smile. I simply tapped a clawed finger against the polished wood. The sound echoed like a cracking bone in the silent room. It isn't thievery, Lord Vance. It is a penalty. I'm just being polite enough to do it in a council meeting instead of burning your granaries to the ground. A heavy silence fell. My wolf, usually bored by human politics, rumbled in agreement. Take, dominate, own. But why? Vance asked, his voice trembling. My house has been loyal to the crown. Your house, I said, my voice low and smooth like velvet dragged over gravel, evicted the Sisters of Mercy from their convent last week to build a private warehouse. You threw 50 orphans into the snow. Vance paled, his eyes darting around the room for support that wasn't coming. That was a clerical error, a business decision. And this is mine. I stood up. The movement was fluid, predatory. The men flinched instinctively, shrinking back into their high-backed chairs. Sign the decree, Vance, or I seize your lands. All of them. By noon tomorrow, you will be a pauper begging for scraps at the city gates. I walked out of the chamber before they even picked up their quills. I knew they would sign. Fear was a far better motivator than loyalty. Caleb fell into step beside me as I strode down the torchlit corridor of the citadel. The stone walls whispered with the history of my ancestors, but I felt no comfort in them. That was brutal, Caleb noted, adjusting the sword belt at his waist. Vance looked ready to faint. He threw children onto the street, I said coldly. He's lucky I didn't throw him off the battlements. My mood was foul. It had been foul for 12 years, but today it was particularly black. The report from Caleb regarding Ilara gnawed at me. Thin, working 2 jobs, cold. I had gold enough to pave the streets, yet I couldn't buy her a warm cloak without risking her safety. Gideon's remaining loyalists were few, but they were vipers in the grass, waiting for me to reveal a weakness. The Equinox Ball preparations are complete, Caleb said, changing the subject as we approached the royal wing. Security is tight. Every guest vetted by the mages. No iron, no hidden blades. And the servants? I asked, staring straight ahead. Caleb paused. Vetted. Background checks came back clean. The royal steward hired extra help from the city. She is on the roster, serving wine in the gallery. My jaw tightened. Serving wine, standing on her feet for hours, pouring for arrogant nobles who would look right through her. Make sure no one harasses the staff, I ordered, my voice dropping an octave, the alpha command slipping in. If anyone touches a server, if anyone looks at a server the wrong way, I want them removed, forcefully. Caleb raised an eyebrow. You want me to throw a duke into the moat for being rude to a serving wench? I want you to feed a duke to the hounds if he breathes wrong in her direction, I snarled. I pushed open the heavy doors to my private chambers, loosening the collar of my tunic. It felt like a noose. She's close, Reese, Caleb warned softly from the doorway. Tonight she'll be in the same room. Can you handle it? Can you keep the wolf in check? I walked to the balcony, looking out at the smoking chimneys of the city below. Can I? I didn't know. But I knew one thing. I was done watching from the shadows.
Chapter 37. Ilara, Table 4 needs ale. Table 6 spilled their stew. And stop leaning against the post. You look like a delinquent. The innkeeper, a man named Barnaby, who resembled a suet pudding stuffed into a stained apron, barked his orders at me, causing my left eye to twitch violently. I'm not leaning, Barnaby, I said, plastering on a smile that was sharp enough to cut glass. I was merely ensuring the structural integrity of this post. It wobbled. I saved the roof. Barnaby turned a shade of purple that clashed horribly with the tavern's grime. Sass. Always the sass. You're lucky you're fast, Ilara, or I'd throw you out in the snow. And lose your best brawler? I grabbed a pitcher of frothy ale. You'd miss me. Who else knows how to get blood out of sawdust? Go, he grunted, pointing a sausage finger toward the rowdy common room, and fix your hair. It looks like a bird's nest. It's a tactical distraction, I muttered under my breath as I shoved through the crowd of drunken dockworkers and merchants. This was my life. At 22, I was supposed to be, I don't know, something. A seamstress? A wife? Instead, I was a tavern wench at the Blind Pig, dodging groping hands and spilling ale for coppers. I lived in a drafty attic above a tannery that smelled of cured leather and despair. Oi, sweetness! A burly man with a missing tooth grabbed my apron strings as I passed. How about a smile for a lonely sailor? I didn't break stride. I slapped his hand away with the heavy wooden serving tray. Crack. How about you keep your hands to yourself before you lose the other tooth? I beamed sweetly. The table erupted in laughter, and the sailor pulled back, nursing his hand. Feisty little thing, ain't she? I moved to the bar, dumping the empty pitcher. I leaned against the rough wood, rubbing my temples. I was exhausted, bone-deep weary. The winter had been harsh, and the firewood prices had doubled. I was sleeping in 2 pairs of wool socks just to keep my toes from turning blue. Sometimes, when I was this tired, I thought about him, the Wolfman, my childhood memory, the prisoner in the cage, the one with the sad, golden eyes and the voice like warm honey who had promised to find me. I swore it, he had said. Liar, I whispered to the dregs of the ale. 12 years. No letters, no knights in shining armor, just a silver coin and a broken promise. He was probably dead, or he was just a man who said what a scared little girl needed to hear. Alara, Barnaby shouted from the scullery, the steward from the palace is here. I'm coming, Barnaby, keep your apron on. If the pay was good, I might finally be able to buy a winter cloak that didn't have moth holes in it. Chapter 38. My apartment was technically an attic, which was landlord speak for a crawl space with a window. It was on the 4th floor of a leaning timber building in the lower district. The wind whistled through the gaps in the shingles, singing a mournful song that kept me awake most nights. I kicked off my worn boots, groaning as my arches throbbed. I flopped onto the straw tick mattress, staring up at the soot-stained rafters. Another day, another copper, I muttered. Or more accurately, another day, another bruise. I rolled over and pulled my small, battered satchel toward me. From the hidden inner lining, I fished out the only thing of value I owned, the coin. It was heavy, cool silver stamped with a wolf's head roaring against a mountain. It didn't look like the currency we used in the markets. The pawnbroker down the street had offered me enough gold for it to feed me for a year. Last winter, when I had caught a fever and run out of wood, I had almost sold it. I had stood at his counter, the coin in my hand, shivering uncontrollably. But I couldn't do it. It was silly, sentimental, stupid, but it was the only proof that he had been real, that I had been brave. Who were you? I whispered, tracing the wolf's profile with my thumb in the dim candlelight. For years, the nuns at the sanctuary told me it was a dream. Trauma, they said. I had been found wandering the woods, starved and mute. They said I imagined the fortress, the hunters, the wolfman to cope with being abandoned by my parents. But dreams didn't leave you with a physical coin. Dreams didn't leave you with the knowledge of how to pick locks or move silently through a forest. And dreams certainly didn't leave you with this weird, inexplicable feeling that something was missing from your chest, a hollow space shaped like a person I couldn't remember clearly. You promised you'd find me, I told the silver wolf. You're really bad at tracking for a wolf. My stomach growled, interrupting my moment of angst. I checked the pantry box, a hardened crust of bread and a shriveled apple, a feast for queens. As I gnawed on the apple, I thought about the job the steward had offered, serving at the Equinox Ball. The pay was 5 silver pieces. 5. That was rent for 3 months. Okay, I said to the empty room. I guess I'm going to the wolf's den. I felt a shiver run down my spine, a cold premonition that made the hair on my arms stand up. I ignored it. It was probably just the draft, or the hunger. I tucked the coin back into my satchel. Tomorrow, I would serve wine to the monsters who ruled the city. I just hoped they tipped better than sailors. Chapter 39. The servants' entrance to the royal citadel was grander than the main gate of the town church. Massive, iron-bound doors stood open, guarded by men in chainmail with the wolf crest emblazoned on their tabards. I stood in line with a dozen other girls, all of us shivering in the evening chill, clutching our cloaks. Name, the guard at the checkpoint barked. He held a scroll, his face hidden behind a steel helm. Ilara, I said, holding my chin up. I'm here for the wine service. The guard didn't look up. He waved a crystal wand over me, a mage tool to detect iron or poison. It hummed softly as it passed my pocket. Empty your pockets. I hesitated, then pulled out a handkerchief, a piece of string, and the coin. I hadn't meant to bring it. I usually left it hidden, but today, going into the heart of the Shifter Kingdom, I felt like I needed the luck. The guard's eyes widened behind his visor when he saw the silver coin. He looked at it, then at me, his expression shifting from boredom to something sharper. Surprise? Suspicion? Where did you get that? He asked, his nostrils flaring slightly as if sniffing me. Then he handed it back, almost reverently. No, just keep it in your pocket. Don't flash it around the nobles. Right, secret silver. Got it. I hurried past him, feeling his eyes drilling into my back. Weird. Shifters were weird. I was ushered into the servants' quarters and given a uniform. It was stiff burgundy with gold trim. It was cleaner than anything I owned. I tied my unruly hair back into a tight, severe braid, pinning it in place. You look terrified, a girl next to me whispered. She was pretty, with round cheeks and nervous hands. I'm not terrified, I lied, adjusting my cuffs. I'm just allergic to snobs. I'm Sarah. Have you heard the rumors about the king? That he eats naughty children? I scoffed. Or that he breathes fire? Sarah's eyes widened. That he's a beast. They say he hasn't smiled in 10 years. They say he killed his own brother with his bare claws. He's not a man, Ilara. He's a monster in a crown. I felt that shiver again, the cold warning. Great, sounds like a charmer. I'll make sure to pour his wine quickly before he decides to eat me. Sarah looked at me like I was already dead. Just don't look him in the eye. That's the rule. Never look an alpha in the eye. I'll look at his shoes, I promised. Safer that way. Chapter 40. The Great Hall was breathtaking. I hated it instantly. It was a cavernous space of stone and stained glass, lit by thousands of candles floating in enchanted chandeliers. The air smelled of roasting meats, expensive spices, and something muskier, the scent of hundreds of shifters. It was overwhelming, a sensory assault that made my head spin. I stood on the upper gallery, holding a heavy silver pitcher of wine. Below, the dance floor was a sea of silk and jewels. The musicians played a lively reel, and the laughter of the nobility echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Stand straight, the head steward hissed, whacking my ankle with a cane. Shoulders back, the king arrives. I am standing straight, I whispered back, resisting the urge to pour the wine on his shoes. If I get any straighter, I'll snap. Below, the crowd hushed. The music stopped abruptly. The massive double doors at the far end of the hall swung open with a resounding boom. And then he walked in. Even from up here, even from a distance, the energy in the room shifted. It was like a storm had entered the space, sucking in all the air. He was flanked by his beta and guards, but he didn't need them. He walked with a predator's grace, a lethal fluidity that made the hair on my arms stand up. He was tall. Sarah hadn't lied about that. Broad shoulders filled out a black velvet tunic, embroidered with silver thread. A heavy fur cloak hung from his shoulders. His hair was dark, falling loosely around a face that looked carved from granite. But it was his face that struck me. It was handsome, yes, devastatingly so, but it was cold. Absolute zero. He scanned the room not like a host greeting guests, but like a wolf surveying a herd of sheep. He looked bored. He looked dangerous. He looked lonely. Lonely. The thought popped into my head unbidden. Why would I think that? He was the most powerful being in the kingdom. That's him, Sarah whispered beside me, her hand shaking so hard the wine in her pitcher rippled. King Rhys. I watched as he moved through the crowd. People parted for him, bowing low. He didn't smile. He didn't stop to chat. He just moved toward the dais, toward the stairs that led up to the gallery where the high table sat, toward me. My heart gave a sudden, violent thump against my ribs. A wave of dizziness washed over me. The coin in my pocket seemed to grow searing hot against my hip. "Run!" an instinct screamed in my head. "Stay!" another voice whispered, a voice that sounded suspiciously like hope. I gripped the handle of the pitcher, my knuckles white. "Get it together, Alara. He's just a rich guy with a bad attitude." Reese reached the bottom of the stairs. He stopped. His head snapped up. His nostrils flared, inhaling deeply. He froze. The entire room seemed to freeze with him. Slowly, terrifyingly, he turned his head. His eyes, dark, intense, and burning with a sudden, terrifying golden fire, locked onto the gallery, locked onto me. I forgot how to breathe. He didn't look bored anymore. He looked like he had just found something he'd been hunting for a very, very long time. And I was the prey.
Chapter 41. The scent hit me like a physical blow, staggering me on the bottom step of the dais. It wasn't just a smell, it was a memory. It was the scent of cold rain, pine needles, and something softer, wildflowers blooming in the snow. It was the scent of the only person who had ever looked at a monster and seen a man. Mate. The word exploded in my mind, a roar from my wolf that drowned out the music, the chatter, and the clinking of goblets. It was primal, absolute, and terrifying. My beta, Caleb, sensed the shift instantly. He stepped closer, his hand hovering over his sword hilt. "Reese? What is it? Assassins?" "Her," I snarled, the word tearing from my throat. I didn't wait for him to understand. I moved. Protocol be damned. The ball be damned. I ascended the stairs to the gallery 2 at a time, my heavy cloak billowing behind me like smoke. The nobles on the lower floor gasped, their whispers rising like a tide. But I didn't care. My entire world had narrowed down to a single point on the upper balcony. There. She stood frozen near a stone pillar, clutching a silver pitcher like a shield. She was dressed in the burgundy velvet of a servant, her hair pulled back in a severe braid that did nothing to hide the stubborn curve of her jaw or the wide, terrified eyes that watched my approach. She was older, taller. The round softness of childhood had given way to the sharp, elegant angles of a woman who had known hunger. But the eyes, those dark, defiant eyes, were the same. Ilara. My wolf clawed at the inside of my chest, demanding to be let out, demanding to claim, to mark, to wrap himself around her and never let go. I forced him down with a mental iron bar. I couldn't shift. Not here. Not in front of half the kingdom. It would terrify her. I reached the top of the gallery. The other servants scattered like mice seeing a hawk, pressing themselves against the walls, heads bowed. But she didn't move. She stood her ground, though I could see the tremor in her hands. I stopped 3 paces from her. Up close, the scent was intoxicating, a drug that made my head spin. I could hear her heart hammering against her ribs, a frantic, bird-like rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. She was looking at my boots, following the rule. Don't look the alpha in the eye. "Look at me," I commanded. My voice came out rougher than I intended, a gravelly rasp laden with 12 years of silence. She hesitated. Then, slowly, defiantly, she lifted her chin. Her gaze collided with mine. A jolt of electricity, hot and sharp, arced between us. It was the mate bond snapping into place, an ancient magic binding our souls. I waited for the recognition. I waited for her to whisper my name, to smile, to know me. But there was no recognition in her eyes, only fear. And beneath the fear, a spark of that same fire I remembered. "Is there a problem with the wine, Your Grace, or do you just enjoy looming over the help?" I stared at her, stunned. She didn't know me. To her, I wasn't Reese, the boy she saved. I was the Alpha King, the monster, the stranger. The realization was a knife in the gut, but it was quickly replaced by a darker, possessive thrill. She didn't know me, which meant I could learn who she had become without the weight of the debt between us. "The wine is not the problem," I murmured, taking a step closer, invading her personal space until I towered over her. The problem is that you are hiding in the shadows, little ghost, and I do not like shadows in my court.
Chapter 42. He is going to eat me. That was the only logical explanation. The King of the North, the most terrifying predator in the realms, had just stormed up the stairs, scattered his own staff, and marched straight up to me with murder in his golden eyes. My heart was beating so fast I thought it might crack a rib. Up close, he was overwhelming. He radiated heat like a furnace. He smelled of wood smoke and expensive leather and something else, something wild and dangerous that made my knees feel like water. And he was staring at me, not just looking, but devouring. His gaze swept over my face, lingering on my mouth, my neck, my hands. It was intense, invasive, and weirdly familiar. "The problem is that you are hiding in the shadows, little ghost," he rumbled. His voice was deep enough to vibrate in the floorboards. Little ghost. Why did that phrase make my stomach do a flip? "I'm not hiding, Your Grace," I managed to say, gripping the pitcher so hard my knuckles turned white. "This is the service gallery. We serve from the shadows so the nobility can pretend the wine appears by magic." His eyes narrowed. A flicker of something, amusement, danced in the gold depths. "You have a sharp tongue for a servant, and you have very loud boots for a king." The words slipped out before I could stop them. The girl beside me, Sarah, let out a tiny squeak of horror and practically melted into the tapestry. I mentally kicked myself. Shut up, Alara. Do not sass the man who can turn into a wolf and rip your head off. But the king didn't rip my head off. He tilted his head, studying me like a puzzle he couldn't solve. He took another step closer. He was so close now that the fur of his cloak brushed against my arm. I wanted to run. I wanted to lean into him. I was losing my mind. "What is your name?" he demanded. I swallowed hard. "Alara, Your Grace." "Alara," he repeated. The way he said it, it sounded like a prayer or a curse. He rolled the syllables around in his mouth like he was tasting fine wine. Suddenly, his hand shot out. I flinched, expecting a blow, but his large, calloused hands wrapped gently around my right wrist, the one holding the pitcher. His skin was scorching hot. The moment he touched me, a shockwave went through my body, a strange, zinging sensation that started in my wrist and shot straight down to my toes. I gasped, nearly dropping the silver pitcher. He didn't seem to notice my shock. He was staring at the underside of my wrist. There, visible just below the cuff of the velvet uniform, was a faint, jagged white line, a scar I'd had since childhood. I didn't even remember how I got it, just that I woke up in the woods with it at 10 years old. His thumb brushed over the scar, a touch so tender it was almost terrifying coming from such a large man. "A souvenir," he whispered, his voice unreadable. "A clumsiness," I corrected breathlessly, trying to pull my hand back. I fell a long time ago." He looked up then, his eyes burning into mine. "You didn't fall, Alara. You fought." I blinked, confused. How would he know? Before I could ask, he released my wrist, but he didn't step back. "You are done here," he announced abruptly. "Excuse me?" "You are done serving wine to these peacocks," he growled, casting a disdainful look over the railing at the dancing nobles. "You are coming with me." Panic flared. Am I being arrested? He gave me a look that was dark, possessive, and utterly terrifying. "No, you are being promoted."
I had found her. I had touched her. I had felt the spark of the bond, the undeniable truth of our souls knitting together. And I had seen the scar, the physical proof of the chains she had broken for me. She didn't remember. She thought she had fallen. The trauma, or perhaps the mages at the sanctuary, had buried the memory of the cage deep in her mind. Good. I didn't want her to remember the broken, bleeding prisoner. I wanted her to know me, the king, the man who could give her the world. But right now, I just wanted to get her away from the prying eyes of the court. Every male in the room could smell her scent now that I had agitated it. I could see heads turning below, nostrils flaring. Mine. My wolf paced, hackles raised. Get her to the den. Lock the door. You are coming with me, I ordered, turning to leave. I can't just leave, she protested, scurrying to keep up with my long strides. The head steward will have my head. I need the 5 silvers, Your Grace. I really need them. I stopped so abruptly she nearly ran into my back. I turned. 5 silvers? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. That is what he pays you? It's the standard rate, she said defensively, clutching her pitcher. Look, I appreciate the promotion, but I have a job. I finish my shift, I get paid, I go home. That's how it works. Not anymore. I reached out and took the heavy silver pitcher from her hands. I passed it to a stunned guard standing nearby. Hold this, I barked. The guard scrambled to obey. Then I turned back to Ilara. You are not going home tonight. Her eyes went wide with genuine fear. What? Why? Look, if I spilled something, I'm sorry. Ilara! The head steward, a weeping sore of a man named Morris, came bustling up the stairs, his face red. What is the meaning of this delay? The Duke of Oakhaven has an empty glass, and you, he pointed a cane at Ilara, you are fraternizing with guests. I should have you whipped. My vision went red. The beast inside me, already close to the surface, roared. I moved faster than a human eye could track. One moment I was standing still. The next, I had Morris by the throat, lifting him a foot off the ground. He dropped his cane. His legs kicked uselessly. Whipped? I snarled, my voice shifting into a guttural growl that dropped the temperature in the gallery by 10 degrees. You would strike her? Your Grace! Morris choked, his eyes bulging. Gasp! Put him down! You're going to kill him! That is the general idea, I told her calmly, tightening my grip. No! She grabbed my arm, my forearm thick with muscle and tension, her small hands squeezed. Don't, please. He's an idiot, but he's not worth it. Please, Your Grace, put him down. Her touch cut through the red haze. She was pleading for the man who threatened her, just like she had pleaded for the prisoner. Her heart hadn't changed. With a sneer of disgust, I threw Morris backward. He landed in a heap, gasping for air. You are relieved of your position, I told him icily. Get out of my sight before I decide to feed you to the wyverns. Morris scrambled away on his hands and knees. I turned back to Ilara. She was staring at me with a mixture of awe and horror. You just fired the head steward, she whispered. I showed restraint, I corrected, adjusting my cuffs. I held out my hand to her. Come, we are going to my solar, now. She looked at my hand, then at the fleeing steward, then back at me. She seemed to realize she had zero choice in the matter. Fine, she huffed, though she didn't take my hand. She crossed her arms. But if you try to feed me to a wyvern, I'm going to be very loud about it. I suppressed a smile. I wouldn't dream of it, little ghost.
Chapter 44. I was currently being kidnapped by the king. Okay, maybe kidnapped was a strong word. I wasn't bound, and he hadn't thrown a sack over my head. But when a man who can lift a full-grown steward with one hand tells you to follow him, you follow him. We marched through the endless stone corridors of the citadel. The king, Rhys, walked with a purpose that forced me to practically jog to keep up. Guards bowed as we passed. Servants pressed themselves into alcoves. It was like walking with a hurricane. So, I said, because silence made me nervous, and when I was nervous, I babbled. Is this about the coin? He didn't stop. What coin? The silver one, I said to his broad back. The guard at the gate saw it. Did he tell you? Is it stolen? Because I swear I didn't steal it. I've had it since I was a kid. It's a keepsake. He stopped at a heavy oak door guarded by 2 massive knights. He turned to me, his expression unreadable. A keepsake from whom? I hesitated. A friend, a very old friend. His eyes softened, just a fraction. It made him look less like a statue and more like a man, a dangerously handsome man. Then it is yours to keep. No one will take it from you. He pushed the doors open. Inside. I walked in and gasped. It wasn't a dungeon. It was a solar, a private living quarter, and it was magnificent. A massive fireplace roared with heat. Furs covered the stone floors. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with scrolls and leather-bound tomes. A table was set with a feast, roast fowl, fruits, fresh bread, and wine. Is this a cell? I asked, stepping on a bearskin rug that was softer than my bed. It is my private chamber, he said, closing the door behind us. The lock clicked with a heavy, final sound. Panic spiked again. I spun around. Look, Your Grace, I'm flattered, really, but I don't do that. He frowned, looking genuinely confused. Do what? That, I gestured vaguely between us. The kingly privilege thing. I'm a bartender. I'm not a mistress. He threw his head back and laughed. It was a deep, rusty sound, like he hadn't used it in years. A mistress? You think I brought you here to bed you? My face heated up. Well, you locked the door, and there's a bed right there. I pointed to the massive four-poster bed in the alcove. He stopped laughing. He walked toward me, the humor vanishing, replaced by that intense, burning focus. He stopped inches from me. He smelled of rain and power. I locked the door to keep the world out, Alara, he said softly, not to keep you in. And I did not bring you here to use you. I brought you here because you look like a wind would blow you over. He gestured to the table. Eat. I blinked. What? Eat, he commanded, pulling out a chair. You are thin. You smell of hunger. It offends me. My hunger offends you? I asked, bewildered. Yes. His eyes flashed gold. Sit. Eat. Or I will feed you myself. I looked at the roast chicken. My stomach let out a treacherous roar that echoed in the quiet room. Fine, I grumbled, sitting down, but only because the chicken looks better than you do. He sat opposite me, pouring a goblet of wine. He watched me with the intensity of a hawk watching a mouse. But he didn't touch me. He just watched. Eat, little ghost. Tonight, you are safe.
Chapter 45. I watched her eat. It was the most satisfying thing I had done in 12 years. Watching her tear into the bread, watching the color return to her pale cheeks, settled the roaring beast inside me. Mate is eating. Mate is safe. I sat opposite her, a goblet of wine untouched in my hand. I wanted to ask her 1,000 questions. Where did you go? Why did you leave the sanctuary? Who hurt you? But I knew I had to be careful. She was skittish. She didn't know she was sitting across from a werewolf, let alone her fated mate. If I pushed too hard, she would bolt. And if she bolted, I would have to chase her. And if I chased her, I might not be gentle when I caught her. So, she said between bites of cheese, waving a fork at me, are you going to stare at me all night? It's unnerving, like eating dinner with a gargoyle. I smirked. Gargoyles are made of stone, Ilara. I am flesh and blood. Could have fooled me, she muttered. You're very still and intense. Do you ever blink? Rarely, I admitted. Blinking implies you might miss something. I do not like to miss things. She paused, looking at me curiously. Why did you really bring me here? And don't give me that my hunger offends you nonsense. You're the king. You don't care about starving servants. I care about you. The words slipped out before I could check them. She froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. Why? You don't know me. I know you were brave, I said, leaning forward. You stood up to the head steward to save him from my wrath. You challenged a king because he was blocking the stairs. You carry a silver coin as if it were a holy relic. She lowered the fork. Her expression softened, a shadow passing over her eyes. The coin, the friend who gave it to me, he was like you. My heart hammered. Like me? Intense, she said softly. Dangerous. He was a prisoner. I helped him escape. He promised he would find me. She let out a bitter, hollow laugh. But he didn't. He forgot. Men like him, men like you make promises to get what you want, and then you move on.
The pain in her voice was a physical blow. I wanted to roar. I wanted to tell her, I am him. I am the boy. I never forgot. But I couldn't. Not yet. She was angry at that boy. She felt abandoned by him. If I revealed myself now, she would hate me. She would see me as the liar who left her alone for 12 years. I had to win her trust as Rhys the king before I could ask for her forgiveness as Rhys the wolf. So, perhaps he didn't forget, I said quietly. Perhaps he was fighting a war to make the world safe enough for you. She looked at me, skepticism written in the set of her jaw. That sounds like a convenient excuse. Maybe. I stood up. The proximity was becoming too much. I needed to shift, to run, to burn off the energy. You will stay here tonight, in the guest alcove. I have an apartment, she protested, standing up too. I have a cat. Well, a stray cat that screams at my window. I need to go back. You are not going back to the lower district, I stated flatly. It is not safe. I can take care of myself. I know you can, but you won't have to. Not anymore. I turned back to her, my hand on the latch. Sleep, Ilara. Tomorrow, we discuss your new position. I don't want a new position, she yelled as I opened the door. You have no choice, I said, and for the first time in 12 years, I let a genuine smile touch my lips. You belong to the crown now. I closed the door, locking it from the outside. I leaned my forehead against the heavy wood, listening to her shout insults at the door. She is safe, my wolf purred. She is home. Now I just had to convince her to stay.
Chapter 46. The first thing I noticed when I woke up was the silence. My attic apartment in the lower district usually sounded like a riot of seagulls and shouting merchants by dawn. This room was silent as a tomb. The second thing I noticed was that I was sleeping on a mattress that felt like a cloud stuffed with feathers. I sat up, blinking in the morning light streaming through the tall, arched windows. The events of the night before crashed back into my memory. The ball, the king, the kidnapping, the roast chicken. Oh, gods, I groaned, burying my face in my hands. I yelled at the Alpha King. I told him he looked like a gargoyle. I threw off the heavy furs and marched to the door. It was still locked, of course. Hey, I pounded on the heavy oak. Hello, is anyone there? I have a job. If I don't show up at the tavern, Barnaby is gonna hire One-Eyed Pete, and Pete spits in the ale. No answer, just the muffled clanking of armor from the guards outside. I huffed, backing away. I wasn't a damsel, I was a survivor. I looked around the room. My eyes landed on the fireplace tools. A slender iron poker. No, too thick. I checked the desk. A letter opener. Too wide. Then I felt my hair. I pulled out a long, sturdy iron hairpin. Perfect. I knelt by the keyhole. It was a heavy, complex mechanism, ancient ironwork by the looks of it, but locks were just puzzles with consequences. I worked the pin inside, listening for the tumblers. Click, click. Come on, you stubborn piece of metal, I muttered, tongue between my teeth. Let me out. You are holding it wrong. I shrieked, dropping the pin, and scrambled backward on my hands and feet like a crab. Rhys was standing by the bookshelf. I hadn't heard the door open. I hadn't heard him move. He was just there, leaning against the stone, wearing a loose linen shirt open at the throat and dark trousers. He looked infuriatingly rested. You sneak, I accused, pointing a shaking finger at him. You should wear bells. You should wear bells. It's polite. And you, little ghost, are a burglar, picking the lock of the king's solar? That is treason. It's not treason, it's an exit strategy, I snapped, standing up and brushing the dust off my velvet uniform. Now, open the door. I need to go. No. He walked over to the table, where a servant had silently laid out a breakfast that could feed a village. My jaw dropped. You fired me from my own life? I upgraded you, he corrected, pouring tea. Sit. Eat. I don't want your tea. I want my autonomy. I marched up to him, tilting my head back to look him in the eye. He was so tall, it was ridiculous. You can't just keep me here like a pet lapdog. What am I supposed to do all day? Sit on a pillow and look decorative? He looked down at me, his golden eyes darkening with that strange, intense heat. You are not a pet, Alara. You are my new personal steward. Steward? I sputtered. You just fired your steward for yelling at me. I don't know how to run a castle. I don't need you to run the castle, he said softly, reaching out to tuck a stray lock of hair behind my ear. His touch burned. I froze. What does that even mean? It means, he said, leaning closer until his breath ghosted over my lips, that I am a very busy, very dangerous man who forgets to eat, sleep, or be human. Your job is to ensure I do not turn into a complete monster. Do you think you can handle that? I stared at him. He was arrogant, bossy, and terrifying. Fine, I whispered, narrowing my eyes, but I demand a raise, 10 silvers a week and weekends off. His smile widened, showing a hint of sharp white teeth. Done.
Chapter 47. My new job appeared to consist mostly of arguing with the most powerful man in the kingdom. Reese, and he insisted I call him Reese when we were alone, which felt scandalously intimate, was a disaster. Oh, he looked polished and regal when he swept through the corridors, terrified nobles bowing in his wake, but his private solar was a chaotic storm of scrolls, maps, weapons, and half-eaten meals. This is a fire hazard, I announced, picking up a discarded cloak from the floor. Do you just shed clothes as you walk? Were you raised by wolves? He was sitting at his massive desk, signing parchments with a furious speed. He paused, the quill hovering over the paper. His shoulders shook slightly. Was he laughing? Something like that, he murmured, not looking up. Leave it. The servants will get it. The servants are terrified to enter this room, I retorted, folding the cloak. I saw a maid cross herself before bringing in the laundry. What do you do to them? Growl? Occasionally. He signed another document with a flourish. It keeps them efficient. It keeps them traumatized, I corrected. I walked over to his desk and slammed a stack of books down. And you need to eat. This porridge is cold. It has a skin on it. It's disgusting. He finally looked up, his golden eyes swirling with amusement. You are berating your king over porridge, Alara? I am berating a man who is wasting good oats, I said, hands on my hips. Eat it, or I'll get a spoon and feed you like a toddler. He leaned back in his chair, the heavy wood creaking. He looked at me with a gaze so heavy, so full of possessive warmth, that I felt myself blushing. You are fearless, he observed quietly. Most people tremble when I raise my voice. You just shout louder. Someone has to, I muttered, turning away to hide the heat in my cheeks. If everyone just nods at you, how will you know when you're being an idiot? Is that your official title? Keeper of the King's Idiocy? It should be. I started organizing the scrolls on his desk, my hands moving deftly. By the way, there's a request here from the Southern Garrison for more blankets. It's been sitting under a half-eaten apple for 3 days. His amusement vanished, replaced with a sharp focus. He snatched the scroll. The South, they shouldn't need blankets yet. The frost hasn't set in. Well, they're asking. Maybe you should look into it instead of brooding out the window. He scanned the document, his face hardening into the mask of the king. You are right, this is urgent. He looked at me, and for a moment, the mask slipped. Thank you, Alara. Just doing my job, Your Grace. Reese, he corrected instantly. Reese, I tested the name. It felt heavy on my tongue. Now eat your porridge, before I tell the guards you're scared of a spoon. He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that made my toes curl, and picked up the spoon. I watched him, a strange sense of satisfaction settling in my chest. He was a monster, yes, but maybe he just needed someone to remind him he was a man, too. Chapter 48. On the 3rd day of my captivity, or employment as Reese called it, I ventured out of the solar. I needed fresh air, and Reese was in a war council meeting that sounded like it involved a lot of shouting. I wandered down to the castle gardens. It was winter, but the royal gardens were kept alive by some sort of heating enchantment. Winter roses bloomed in defiance of the snow. I was admiring a particularly vicious-looking thorn bush when a voice dripped with ice behind me. I didn't know the king allowed the scullery maids to wander the private grounds. I turned.
Standing there was a woman who looked like she had been carved from marble and dipped in gold. She was tall, statuesque, wearing a gown of emerald silk that cost more than my entire village. Her eyes were sharp, feline, and currently looking at me as if I were a stain on her shoe. "I'm not a scullery maid," I said politely, wiping my hands on my dress, which was a nice wool one Reese had provided, though simple compared to hers. "I'm Alara, the king's personal steward." The woman laughed. It was a cruel, tinkling sound. "Steward? Is that what he calls his bed warmers now? How quaint." My spine stiffened. "I manage his affairs, my lady, not his bed." "Please," she scoffed, stepping closer, her nose wrinkling. She smelled near me, her nose wrinkling. "Tell me, does he make you beg? Does he enjoy breaking something so fragile?" "Lady Genevieve," a deep voice growled from the archway. I spun around. Reese was standing there. He wasn't wearing his crown, but he wore his power like a cloak. The air around him shimmered with heat. His eyes were fixed on Genevieve, and they were not friendly. Genevieve's face transformed instantly into a mask of simpering charm. "Your Grace, I was just instructing the new girl on proper protocol." "By insulting her?" Reese walked towards us. He moved between me and Genevieve, blocking her from my view. It was a protective move, primal and absolute. "Ilara is not a girl. She is under my direct protection. To insult her is to insult me." Genevieve paled. I meant no offense, my king. I simply thought a human might be lost." "She is exactly where she belongs," he snarled, his voice dropping to that terrifying register that made the ground vibrate. "If you ever speak to her with anything less than the respect you would show a queen, I will banish you from this court. Do you understand?" Genevieve curtsied so low she nearly fell over. "Yes, Your Grace. Forgive me." She scurried away, casting one last hateful glance at me. Reese turned to me, the anger in his eyes fading into concern. He reached out, running his hands down my arms as if checking for injuries. "Did she hurt you?" "No," I said, staring at him. He had just threatened a noblewoman for me. She has a very sharp tongue." "She is a viper," he spat. "Stay away from her." "I can handle a snob, Reese," I said softly, touching his forearm. His muscles were rock hard, tense with rage. "I've dealt with drunk sailors and angry innkeepers. A lady in a silk dress doesn't scare me." He looked down at my hand on his arm, then up at my face. "She should scare you," he said. "She is a predator. You are human, weak." "No," he said fiercely, grabbing my chin and forcing me to look at him. "Precious, vital. You are the strongest thing in this castle, Ilara. Never doubt that." My heart hammered against my ribs. The way he looked at me, it wasn't how a king looked at a servant. It was how a starving man looked at bread. "Okay," I whispered. "I won't." Chapter 49. A storm raged outside that night. Thunder shook the very foundations of the citadel, and lightning illuminated the stained glass windows in jagged flashes. Reese was pacing. He had been pacing for an hour, back and forth in front of the roaring fire, a glass of dark wine in his hand that he hadn't sipped. He was agitated, his movements jerky, his energy crackling like the storm outside. I was sitting in the window seat, mending a tear in one of his tunics. I watched him, worry gnawing at my lip. "You're going to wear a groove in the stone," I said softly. He stopped, his back to me. "The storm," he muttered. "It unsettles me." It wasn't just the storm. I could feel it coming off him, a restless, caged energy. It reminded me of the wolf. The memories surfaced unbidden, the wolf in the cage, pacing, whining, rattling the chains. "Come here," I said, putting down the needle and thread. He turned, his eyes wild, the pupils blown wide so only a thin ring of gold remained. "Ilara, stay back. I am not myself tonight." "I'm not afraid of you," I said, standing up and walking toward him. "You should be."
he rasped, gripping the mantelpiece until the stone groaned. There is a beast inside me, Ilara, a monster that wants to break things. I stopped in front of him. I reached out and took the wine glass from his hand, setting it on the table. Then I took his hands. They were trembling. My friend, the one I told you about, he had a beast inside him too. He said it was angry, that it hurt. Reese went still. He stared down at our joined hands. And what did you do? I couldn't do much, I admitted. I was just a kid, but I used to talk to him, tell him stories about the forest, about the stars, just to remind him that the cage wasn't the whole world. He made a choked sound in his throat. He pulled one hand free and cupped my cheek. His palm was calloused, hot and rough, but his touch was agonizingly gentle. Tell me a story, Ilara, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Remind me. I leaned into his touch, my eyes fluttering closed. Once upon a time, there was a king who was very grumpy and very messy, and he lived in a castle that was too big for him. He let out a shaky breath, his thumb tracing my cheekbone. Did he find a queen? My eyes snapped open. We were so close. I could see the flecks of amber in his gold eyes. I could feel the heat of his body radiating through his shirt. The air between us was thick, heavy with unsaid words and a pull I couldn't explain. I don't know, I whispered. The story isn't finished yet. He leaned down. For a heartbeat, I thought he was going to kiss me. I wanted him to. God, I wanted him to. But he stopped, his forehead resting against mine. He breathed in deeply, shuddering as he inhaled my scent. Thank you. You settle him, the beast. I have that effect, I said shakily. I'm very boring. I put monsters to sleep. He chuckled, a low, dark sound. You are many things, little ghost, but boring is not one of them. He pulled back, the wildness in his eyes receding, replaced with a weary tenderness. But the tension remained, a taut string between us, vibrating with every heartbeat. Chapter 50. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the sky a bruised purple. But the storm inside the castle was just beginning. I was in the solar, polishing the silver, because Reese refused to let the regular staff do it, claiming they clattered too much, when the doors banged open. Caleb strode in, looking grim. He was wearing full armor, his sword strapped to his hip. Reese followed him, dressed in a black tunic that made him look like the Grim Reaper's handsome cousin. The northern borders have been breached, Caleb said, without preamble. Rogues, a raiding party. They hit a village at dawn. I dropped the polishing cloth. A village? Are people hurt? Reese turned to me. His face was a mask of cold fury. The king fully in control. Yes, we ride within the hour to intercept them. I'm coming, I said instinctively. Absolutely not, Reese and Caleb said in unison. I can help. I can bandage wounds. I can cook. I'm not useless. You are human, Reese said, stepping close to me. He gripped my shoulders. And where we are going, there will be blood and steel. You stay here, inside the walls, where it is safe. I hate it when you order me around, I snapped, though fear coiled in my gut. Not for me, for him. What if you get hurt? His expression softened. I am unkillable, remember? I am the alpha. Even alphas bleed, I whispered, thinking of the scar on his shoulder. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he did something that shocked the breath out of me. He reached into his tunic and pulled out a dagger. It was beautiful, with a hilt wrapped in black leather and a blade that shimmered with a faint, oily sheen. Take this, he commanded, pressing it into my hand. A knife? I have the file. This is better, he said grimly. It is star steel. It will cut through armor. It will cut through hide. He looked deep into my eyes. If anyone tries to touch you while I am gone, you use this. You aim for the throat. Do you understand? Reese, I said, trembling slightly. Good, he said intensely. Fear keeps you alive.
Promise me, Alara, you stay in the Solar, you keep the door locked, you trust no one but Caleb's men. I promise, I nodded. He leaned down and pressed a hard, fierce kiss to my forehead. It was a brand, a claim. I will return, he vowed. I always return to you. He turned and strode out, his cape billowing. Caleb gave me a curt nod and followed. The heavy doors slammed shut. I was alone again. I looked down at the dagger in my hand. It was heavy, lethal, and cold. I walked to the window and watched as a column of riders thundered out of the castle gates. At the head was a massive black horse, and on its back was the king. As they reached the tree line, I saw something impossible. The king didn't just ride. He leapt from the saddle. In midair, his form blurred, expanded, and shifted. Where a man had been, a massive, midnight black wolf landed on the snow, throwing back its head to let out a howl that shook the glass in the window. I gasped, dropping the dagger. It clattered on the stone floor. The black wolf, the howl, the scar, the memory of the cage crashed into me with the force of a landslide. The boy, the wolf. Reese, I whispered, my hand flying to my mouth. It's you.
Chapter 51. I stood frozen at the window long after the dark shape of the wolf had disappeared into the tree line. The dagger Reese had given me lay on the stone floor, its star-steel blade glinting in the pale winter light. It's him, I whispered, the words trembling in the empty solar. My knees gave way, and I sank onto the window seat, clutching the velvet curtains for support. The puzzle pieces that had been floating in my mind for days suddenly slammed into place with a deafening click. The scar on his wrist, the way he looked at me with that intense, hungry recognition, the coin, the exact crest of the royal house that the boy in the cage had given me, the way he had known about my clumsiness. He knew, I said, my voice rising in disbelief. The whole time, he knew who I was. I pulled the silver coin from my pocket, rubbing my thumb over the worn metal. For 12 years, I had held onto this piece of silver like a lifeline. I had talked to it when I was lonely. I had cried over it when I was hungry. I had cursed the boy who gave it to me for forgetting me. But he hadn't forgotten. He was the king, the Alpha, the most powerful man in the realm. And he had let me scrub floors and serve ale in a dive bar while he sat on a throne of gold. A spark of anger ignited in my chest. It wasn't a small spark. It was a roaring inferno. He had watched me. He had let me think he was dead. He had kidnapped me and played games, pretending to be a stranger. "Oh, you are in so much trouble, Wolfie," I hissed, standing up and scooping up the dagger. I paced the room. My sadness evaporated, replaced by the righteous fury of a woman who had been lied to. He thought he could just waltz back in here, all brooding and heroic, and I would swoon. He thought he could keep secrets from his personal steward. I marched to the desk. I reorganized his scrolls, by color, not importance, just to annoy him. I ate the rest of his cheese. I sharpened the dagger on a whetstone I found by the fire, imagining it was his thick, stubborn skull. Hours passed. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room. I didn't light the candles. I waited in the dark, sitting in his massive chair behind the desk, the dagger stabbed dramatically into an apple on the table. Finally, the heavy tread of boots echoed in the hallway. The guards outside snapped to attention. The lock clicked. He had the key, of course, and the door swung open. Reese filled the doorway. He was still in his armor, though it was battered and stained with dark mud and blood. He looked exhausted, his hair wild, his face streaked with grime, but his eyes immediately scanned the room, frantic, until they landed on me. "Ilara," he breathed, relief flooding his features. He took a step forward. "You are safe." "I am," I said, my voice cool and calm from the shadows, "but I can't say the same for you, Your Grace." He paused, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. The predator in him went still. "Ilara?" "Close the door, Reese," I commanded. "We need to have a little chat about your childhood pets." Chapter 52. Reese closed the door, the heavy latch clicking shut. He didn't move further into the room. He stood there, a massive, bloodied warrior who had just returned from slaughter, looking warily at a small woman sitting in his chair. "You are angry," he observed, his voice rough with fatigue. "Angry?" I let out a short, sharp laugh. "No, angry is when the baker burns my bread. Angry is when I stub my toe. This," I gestured to the air around me, "this is a tactical assessment of your imminent demise." He winced, his hand going to his side. I saw fresh blood seeping through the gaps in his armor. My heart lurched, traitorous organ, but I forced myself to stay seated. "You're hurt," I said, the accusation losing some of its bite. "It is nothing," he dismissed. "A rogue with a lucky spear. Alara, why are you sitting in the dark with a knife in an apple?" "Because I realized something today, Reese. Or should I call you Wolfie?" He froze. The stillness was absolute. He didn't breathe, he didn't blink, he just stared at me, his golden eyes glowing in the gloom. "You saw," he whispered. I saw you jump out of a window and turn into a giant dog, a very familiar giant dog." He closed his eyes for a moment, letting out a long, shuddering breath. When he opened them again, the mask of the king was gone. It was just the boy from the cage, older and harder, but terrified. "I wanted to tell you," he said. "When?" I demanded, standing up. "When I was serving you wine? When you locked me in this room? Or maybe you were waiting for our 10-year anniversary of you abandoning me?" He flinched as if I had struck him. He strode forward, ignoring his injury, closing the distance between us in 3 strides. He stopped at the edge of the desk, his hands gripping the wood until his knuckles turned white. "I never abandoned you," he growled, the intensity of his voice shaking the floorboards. "I sent you away to save you. I sent gold, chests of it. I paid for the best protection money could buy." "I never got it," I yelled back, slamming my hand on the desk. "I lived in an attic. I ate stale bread. I thought you were dead." "I know," he roared, the sound cracking with pain. "I know you suffered, and it kills me. But if I had come for you, Gideon would have flayed you alive to get to me. I had to stay away. I had to let you hate me so you would live." We were breathing heavily, staring at each other across the desk. The air crackled with 12 years of pain and silence. "You lied," I whispered, my voice breaking. "You looked me in the eye and acted like a stranger." "Because I am a monster, Alara. Look at me. I am covered in blood. I kill for a living. I didn't want you to look at me and see the beast. I wanted one day where you looked at me and just saw a man." His confession hung in the air, raw and bleeding. My anger deflated, leaving behind a hollow ache. He hadn't stayed away out of cruelty. He had stayed away out of love. Twisted, stubborn, wolfish love. I walked around the desk. He watched me, his body tense, waiting for me to run or scream. Instead, I reached out and gently touched the blood-stained armor over his heart. "You're an idiot," I said softly, "but you're my idiot." Chapter 53. Reese looked at me as if I had spoken in a forgotten tongue. He covered my hand with his own. His palm was sticky with blood, grime, and sweat, but I didn't pull away. You're not afraid?" he asked, his voice sounding incredibly young. "Oh, I'm terrified," I assured him. "You're a werewolf king who just admitted to stalking me for a decade. That's a lot to process. But right now, you're bleeding on the carpet, and I just cleaned it." He let out a weak chuckle that turned into a grimace of pain. He swayed slightly. "Sit," I ordered, pointing to the chair I had vacated, "before you fall over and dent the floor." He obeyed, sinking into the chair with a heavy groan. I immediately went into steward mode. I bustled around the room, gathering water from the pitcher, clean linen napkins, sorry, royal laundry, and the bottle of strong brandy he kept on the shelf. I knelt between his spread knees. "Armor off, now." He fumbled with the buckles, his fingers clumsy with exhaustion. "I can do it," he muttered. "Clearly not." I swatted his hands away. "Stop wiggling. You're worse than a horse." I unbuckled the leather straps and pulled the heavy breastplate away. Beneath, his tunic was soaked in crimson.
I used the dagger, the irony was not lost on me, to slice the fabric open, peeling it away from his skin. There was a nasty gash along his ribs. It wasn't deep enough to be fatal for a shifter, but it was ugly, oozing dark blood. "This needs cleaning," I said, pouring brandy onto a cloth. "It's going to sting." "I do not feel pain," he grunted, bracing himself. I pressed the cloth to the wound. He hissed, his hands gripping the arms of the chair so hard the wood splintered. "Liar," I murmured, dabbing gently. "You feel everything. You just pretend you don't." He looked down at me, his golden eyes burning. "I feel you," he whispered. "Your hands, your scent. It's the only thing I feel." My breath hitched. I focused on the wound, refusing to look up. "Don't get poetic on me, Wolfie. You're still in the doghouse." "I deserve it," he admitted. "I should have told you the moment I saw you at the ball." "Yes, you should have." I rinsed the cloth in the basin, the water turning pink. "Why didn't you, really?" He was silent for a long moment, watching my hands work. "Because you were looking at me with fear, and I am a coward, Ilara. I can face an army of rogues without blinking, but the thought of seeing disgust in your eyes, it terrified me." I paused, looking up at him. His face was open, vulnerable in a way the king never was. "I don't think you're disgusting," I said quietly. "I think you're messy and loud and bossy, but you saved the village today, didn't you?" "We drove them back. No villagers were harmed." "See?" I resumed cleaning the wound. "A monster wouldn't care about villagers. A king does." He reached out, his finger hooking under my chin, lifting me until I was forced to look into his eyes. The intensity there stole the air from my lungs. "I am not a king right now," he rumbled. "I am just a male who is very glad his mate did not stab him with an apple knife." Mate. There was that word again. I didn't know exactly what it meant in wolf speak, but the way he said it made my insides melt like wax. "Don't push your luck," I whispered. "I still might." Chapter 54. I finished bandaging him, wrapping the linen strips tightly around his muscular torso. His skin was hot to the touch, radiating a feverish heat that I assumed was normal for a werewolf, given he was basically a walking furnace. "There," I said, tying the knot. "You'll live, but no fighting for at least 12 hours. 12 hours, he mused, testing the bandage. A lifetime. He didn't put his shirt back on. He just sat there, half naked in the firelight, looking like a fallen god carved from bronze and scars. I tried very hard to look at his face, but my eyes kept drifting to the expanse of his chest, the dusting of dark hair, the ridge of abdominal muscles that rippled when he moved. "Focus, Ilara. He is your employer and a canine." "You should sleep," I said, standing up and wiping my hands on a towel. "I'll take the window seat." "No." He reached out and grabbed my hand, pulling me back. I stumbled, landing right between his knees again, my hands resting on his bare shoulders to steady myself. The contact sent a jolt through me that was stronger than the lightning from the storm. His skin was electric. "Rhys," I warned, though my voice was breathless. "Sleep with me," he pleaded. It wasn't a command. It was a desperate request. Not like that. Just be near me. The beast is unsettled. The bloodlust is still in my blood. If you are far away, I will not rest. I looked into his eyes. I saw the exhaustion, but also the wildness he was struggling to contain. He was fighting his own instincts to keep me safe. "Okay," I whispered, "but if you snore, I'm kicking you off the bed." A tired smile ghosted his lips. He stood, pulling me with him. He led me to the massive 4-poster bed. He didn't bother with the covers. He just collapsed onto the mattress, pulling me down with him. He arranged us so that his back was to the door, always the protector, and I was curled against his chest, my head tucked under his chin. He threw a heavy fur blanket over us. It was intimate, overwhelmingly so. I could hear his heartbeat, slow and powerful, thump, thump, thump. It was a lullaby. His arm draped over my waist, holding me tight, heavy and possessive. He buried his face in my hair, inhaling deeply. "Ilara," he murmured against my scalp. "The gold," he mumbled, his voice slurring with sleep. "I sent it to the sanctuary, the headmistress. She wrote to me, said you received it." I frowned against his chest. "I didn't. I left when I was 18. The nuns gave me a bag of clothes and a pat on the back. I never saw a copper. Reese went still. Even in his sleep haze, the predator woke up. She lied, he growled, the vibration rumbling through my own chest. She stole from you. It doesn't matter now, I soothed, stroking his arm. I survived. Go to sleep, Reese. It matters, he whispered, his grip tightening. Everyone who hurt you, everyone who took from you, I will burn their worlds to ash. Later, I said softly. Burn later. Sleep now. He let out a long sigh, his body finally relaxing into the mattress. Within minutes, his breathing deepened. He was asleep. I lay there, awake in the arms of the Wolf King, listening to the wind howl outside. I felt safe, safer than I had ever felt in my life. But his words nagged at me. She lied. If the headmistress had lied to the king, who else was lying? And if Reese had enemies bold enough to attack the border, were we really safe inside these walls?
Chapter 55. The next morning, Reese was gone when I woke up. The space beside me was cold, but there was a note on the pillow, a piece of parchment with hasty, jagged handwriting. Council meeting. Urgent. Do not leave the solar. Breakfast is coming. I will return by noon. R. Bossy to the end, I smiled, tracing the R with my finger. I stretched, feeling surprisingly rested despite sharing a bed with a creature who radiated heat like a wood stove. I got up, washed my face in the basin, and put my uniform back on. A knock at the door startled me. "Breakfast, mistress?" a timid voice called. I unlocked the door. It was a young maid, her eyes lowered, holding a tray. I stepped aside to let her in. "Thank you," I said. "What's your name?" "Daisy, mistress," she squeaked, setting the tray down and practically running for the door. "Daisy, wait," I called. "Is the king still in the council chamber?" She nodded frantically. "Yes, mistress, with Lord Caleb and the Lady Genevieve." My stomach gave a sour twist. Genevieve, the woman in the emerald dress who had looked at me like I was garbage. "What is she doing there?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She brought news, mistress, from the south. Something about a rising." Daisy bobbed a curtsy and fled. I stared at the closed door. A rising? I couldn't just sit here and eat toast. Reese was in a meeting about a threat, and Genevieve was there. My instincts, honed by years of surviving on the streets, were screaming that something was wrong. "Do not leave the solar," Reese had written. "Sorry, Wolfie, I'm bad at following orders," I muttered, grabbing the dagger and tucking it into my boot. I slipped out of the room. I didn't go to the main entrance of the council chamber. That would be guarded. I knew the castle layout now, thanks to my earlier explorations. There was a servant's passage that ran behind the tapestries in the great hall, leading to a small alcove overlooking the council room. It was meant for lighting the high torches, but it was perfect for eavesdropping. I moved silently through the dusty passage, the cobwebs brushing my face. I reached the ventilation grate and peered down. Reese was there, standing at the head of the table. He looked recovered, his power radiating off him, but his face was grim. Caleb stood beside him, and there sat Genevieve, looking smug in crimson silk. "The reports are confirmed," Genevieve said, her voice smooth as poisoned honey. "The rogues at the border were not random, my king. They wore the mark." "The broken chain," Reese said, his voice ice. "But Gideon is dead," Caleb argued. "Reese killed him." "Did he?" Genevieve asked, twirling a lock of hair. "We never found the body, did we? Just a lot of blood and a missing arm." Reese slammed his fist on the table. "I ripped his throat out, Genevieve. I watched the light leave his eyes." "And yet," she purred, sliding a parchment across the table, "this was found on the rogue leader's body this morning. Read it." Reese picked up the paper. I watched his knuckles turn white. A low growl started in his chest, vibrating even up to my hiding spot. "What does it say?" Caleb demanded. Reese looked up, and for a second, his eyes flashed directly toward the grate where I was hiding, as if he could sense me. But he looked past me, staring at a ghost. "It says," Reese rasped, "the king has a weakness. The girl from the cage. Bring her to me, and the north falls."
My blood ran cold. They weren't just attacking the borders. They weren't just rebels. Gideon was alive, and he knew about me. Suddenly, a hand clamped over my mouth from behind. A cold blade pressed against my throat. You shouldn't eavesdrop, little mouse. It's bad manners.
Chapter 56. The blade pressed against the tender skin of my throat, cold and sharp. The smell of the attacker was wrong, stale sweat and sulfur, masking the scent of a shifter, a spy. Quiet, the voice hissed. Move and you bleed. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but strangely, my mind went cold. Fear, Reese had said, keeps you alive, but panic kills you. I wasn't going to panic. I was Ilara Vance, and I had survived the streets, starvation, and a grumpy Alpha King. I wasn't going to die in a dusty ventilation shaft. Aim for the throat. Reese's command echoed in my memory. The attacker shifted his grip, trying to drag me backward into the shadows. He underestimated me. He thought I was just a servant, a soft human girl. He didn't know I had a star steel dagger tucked in my boot. Walking is hard when you're dragging dead weight, I muttered against his hand. Shut up, he growled. I went boneless. It was a trick I learned from a drunk patron at the tavern. I dropped my entire weight, forcing him to stumble to keep his hold on me. As he lurched forward, his grip on the knife slipped just a fraction. That was all I needed. I slammed my heel down onto his instep, hard. He grunted in pain. In the split second of his distraction, I twisted, ripping myself from his grasp. The knife grazed my neck, a stinging line of heat, but I ignored it. I dropped to one knee, my hand finding the hilt of the dagger in my boot. I drew it in one fluid motion. He lunged for me, a shadow in the dim light. I didn't retreat. I drove the dagger upward. I didn't reach his throat, he was too tall, but the blade sank deep into his thigh. He howled, a sound that echoed through the vents. He backhanded me a blow that sent stars exploding across my vision. I hit the stone wall, dazed, the dagger skittering away. He loomed over me, eyes wild with rage, tightening his grip on his knife. You little rat. Suddenly, the wall behind me exploded. Stone and mortar shattered the passage as a massive force tore through the hidden door leading to the council chamber. A roar shook the very foundations of the castle, a sound so primal, so terrifying that the spy froze mid-strike. Reese was there. He wasn't fully human nor fully wolf. His eyes were burning gold pools of fury, his canines elongated, his claws out. He looked like a god of vengeance. He didn't speak, he moved. He grabbed the spy by the front of his tunic and hurled him through the air. The man flew with savage force, crashing through the wooden railing and plummeting down onto the council table below, shattering it into splinters. Reese turned to me. The rage on his face vanished, replaced by a terror so profound it broke my heart. He fell to his knees, his large hands hovering over me, trembling. Ilara, he choked out, seeing the thin line of blood on my neck. I know, I winced as I sat up, but the view here is better. Chapter 57. Reese scooped me up into his arms as if I weighed nothing, clutching me to his chest so tightly I could barely breathe. He leaped from the ventilation alcove down to the council floor, landing with a heavy thud that cracked the stone tiles. Chaos erupted. Caleb had his sword at the throat of the groaning spy lying amidst the wreckage of the table. Genevieve was pressed against the wall, looking pale and terrified. He was in the walls, Genevieve stammered. I didn't know. Reese ignored her. He ignored Caleb. He ignored the spy. He marched out of the council chamber, kicking the doors open. Reese, I said, clutching his tunic, put me down. I can walk. You're making a scene. I am the king, he snarled, striding down the corridor. I am the scene. He didn't stop until we reached the highest tower of the citadel, the sanctum. It was a circular room filled with ancient magic, glowing crystals, and a massive bed covered in furs. It was the heart of his territory, the safest place in the north.
He kicked the door shut and engaged the magical locks. Then he carried me to the bed and set me down gently, as if I were made of spun glass. He stepped back, pacing the room like a caged animal, his hands running through his hair. He touched you. He had a knife to your throat. If I had been a second later... But you weren't, I said calmly, and I stabbed him in the leg. Did you see? It was very heroic. He stopped pacing and turned to me. His chest was heaving. This is not a game, Alara. Gideon is alive. He knows you are here. He knows you are my weakness. Why? I demanded, standing up on the bed to be taller. Why am I your weakness, Rhys? I'm just a girl you met once 12 years ago. Why does everyone think I'm the key to destroying you? He stared at me, the silence stretching taut between us, the golden fire in his eyes dimmed to a smoldering ember. He walked back to the bed, stopping right in front of me, his hand cupping my cheek, his thumb brushing over my bottom lip. Because, he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, my soul, my other half of my spirit, the wolf inside me chose you the moment you offered me water in that cell. For 12 years I have been incomplete, hollow. I stayed away because I thought I could protect you from this, from me. But the bond, it does not fade. It only grows hungry. He pulled back slightly to look into my eyes. If you die, Alara, I die. I go mad. I become a beast with no tether. Gideon knows this. He knows that if he breaks you, he breaks the king. I stared at him, my heart pounding. It wasn't just a crush. It wasn't just gratitude. It was biological, magical, eternal. So, I'm stuck with you? I whispered, my voice trembling. A wry, sad smile touched his lips. I am afraid so, little ghost. You are tethered to a monster.
I sat on the edge of the massive bed, processing the bomb he had just dropped. Mate. It explained everything. The intensity, the pull I felt toward him, the way he looked at me like I was the only source of light in a dark room. Rhys moved to the basin in the corner, pouring water from a crystal pitcher. He returned with a damp cloth, his movements slow and deliberate, telegraphing every action so he wouldn't startle me. Let me clean your neck, he murmured. I tilted my head back. The cut was shallow, barely a scratch, but to him it was a catastrophic failure of his protection. He dabbed the cool cloth against my skin, his focus absolute. His breathing was still ragged, his wolf clearly fighting for control. Rhys, I said softly. Hush, he commanded gently. Let me tend to you. I'm fine, I insisted, catching his wrist. His pulse thundered beneath my fingers. But you're not. You're vibrating. He dropped the cloth and stepped back, running a hand over his face. I want to go back down there and tear that spy apart limb by limb. I want to burn the world for daring to touch you. That sounds messy and not very productive. I slid off the bed and walked to him. He was so tall, so broad, so powerful, and he was shaking apart because of me. You called me your tether, I said, looking up at him. So let me tether you. He looked down, his eyes dark with desire and fear. Alara, you do not know what you are asking. The bond, now that we are close, now that you know, it is consuming. If I touch you now, I will not be able to stop. My breath hitched. The air in the room suddenly felt thick, charged with static electricity. I didn't ask you to stop, I whispered. He went still. Do not toy with me, Alara. I am a starving man standing at a feast. If you offer, I will take. I reached out and placed my hands on his chest, feeling the hard muscle beneath the linen shirt. I'm not toying. I'm tired of being afraid, Rhys. I'm tired of you treating me like glass. I survived the hunters. I survived the streets. I can survive you. He let out a low growl, his hands gripping my waist. Survive me? I want to worship you. I want to make you mine in every way a male can claim a female. Then do it, I challenged, my sass returning as my knees went weak. Or are you all bark and no bite, Wolf King? Something in him snapped. The restraint he had held onto for 12 years shattered like cheap glass.
He scooped me up again, but this time there was no gentleness. It was possessive, urgent. He threw me onto the furs of the bed and followed me down, his body covering me, heavy and hot and perfect. "You foolish, brave girl," he growled against my lips. "I will never let you go."
Chapter 59. His kiss was not a question, it was an invasion. It tasted of dark wine, danger, and a desperation that matched my own. His lips moved over mine with a hunger that stole my breath and replaced it with his own. I wrapped my arms around his neck, pulling him closer, needing to erase every inch of space between us. For 12 years, I had felt a hollow space in my chest. As his body pressed against mine, that space filled. It was like coming home to a house I hadn't known I owned. "Ilara," he groaned, breaking the kiss to bury his face in the crook of my neck. He inhaled deeply, his nose brushing the sensitive skin where the knife had grazed. "Mine, you are mine." "Yours," I gasped, arching into him as his hands roamed over me, rough, calloused, and setting my skin on fire. "I'm yours, Reese." He stripped the velvet uniform from my body as if it were wrapping paper, leaving me bared to his gaze. I should have felt shy. I should have felt exposed. But under his golden, glowing stare, I felt worshipped. He looked at my scars, the thin ones from the streets, the old ones from the cold, and traced them with his tongue, turning pain into pleasure. "You are beautiful," he rasped, his voice vibrating against my skin. So strong, so perfect. When he finally shed his own clothes, revealing the magnificent, scarred landscape of his body, I reached out to touch him. I traced the old silver burn on his wrist, the white line on his shoulder. My warrior, my monster. "Reese," I whispered, looking into his eyes, "make me forget the cold." He growled, a sound of pure male satisfaction, and then he claimed me. It was intense, a collision of souls as much as bodies. There was no hesitation, no awkwardness. It was instinct. It was the ancient magic of the mate bond singing in my blood, telling me this is him, this is right, this is forever. Every touch was electric. Every movement was a promise. He took me with a fierce, possessive rhythm that drove everything else from my mind. Gideon, the war, the fear. There was only Reese, his heat, his scent, his weight. At the peak, when the world dissolved into white light, I felt a snap deep in my soul, a golden thread tying itself into an unbreakable knot. I cried out his name, and he roared mine, his teeth grazing my shoulder in a phantom mark. Afterwards, he collapsed against me, burying his face in my hair, his breathing ragged. He held me so tightly, I thought he might crack my ribs, but I didn't care. I held him back just as hard. "I love you," I whispered into the silence of the room. He went still. Then he lifted his head, looking at me with wonder and a fierce, terrifying joy. "I have loved you since you offered me water in the dark," he vowed. "I will love you until the stars burn out." I smiled, tracing his jaw. "That's a long time, Wolfie. You better not get boring." He laughed, pressing a kiss to my palm. "I promise to keep things interesting, my queen." Chapter 60. Morning light filtered through the high crystal windows of the sanctum, bathing the room in a soft, ethereal glow. I woke up wrapped in furs and warm, hard muscle. Reese was asleep, his arm thrown protectively over my waist, his face buried in my neck. For a moment, I just lay there, savoring the peace. My body ached in a pleasant way, a reminder of the night's passion. The bond between us hummed, a warm golden current that let me feel his contentment even in his sleep. But reality has a nasty habit of crashing the party. Gideon is alive. He knows. I shifted, and Reese's arm tightened instantly. His eyes snapped open, alert, golden, predatory, before softening as they focused on me. "Good morning," he rumbled, his voice gravelly with sleep. "Morning," I smiled, pecking him on the lips. "You snore, just so you know." "I do not snore," he denied, nuzzling my jaw.
I purr like a large, dangerous cat. Keep telling yourself that. I sat up, pulling the fur sheet around me. Reese, we need to talk. About the spy, about Gideon. The playfulness vanished from his face, replaced by the mask of the king. He sat up, the muscles of his back shifting. Caleb is interrogating the spy. We will find out where Gideon is hiding. And then what? I asked. You go off to war again? You leave me in a tower. He looked at me, his expression hard. I will do whatever keeps you safe. No, I said firmly. That didn't work last time. You sent me away and I was miserable. You stayed away and you were miserable. And Gideon still found out. I turned to face him fully. I am not going to be a weakness, Reese. I am your mate. If I'm tied to you, then I'm tied to this war. You are human, Alara. You cannot fight shifters. I stabbed a spy yesterday, and I broke you out of a dungeon with a file and a rock. I'm scrappy, I'm smart, and I know how to be invisible. I reached out and took his hand. Don't hide me away. Teach me. Show me how to use the dagger properly. Show me the maps. Let me be your strength, not your liability. He stared at me for a long time, searching my face. He saw the stubborn set of my jaw, the fire in my eyes. He realized finally that he couldn't protect me by locking me up. Slowly, he nodded. He brought my hand to his lips and kissed the knuckles. Very well, he agreed. You want to be a warrior, then I will train you. But be warned, my love, I am a harsh teacher. I can handle you, I smirked. I've seen you afraid of a spoon. He chuckled, pulling me back into his arms for a kiss that promised both trouble and devotion. Suddenly, a chime echoed through the room, a magical alert from the crystal by the door. Reese pulled back, his eyes narrowing. It's Caleb. He's at the door. Reese threw on his trousers and strode to the door, unlocking the seals. Caleb stood there, looking grim, a scroll in his hand. Spit it out, Reese commanded. The spy talked, Caleb said, his eyes flicking briefly to me, sitting in the bed wrapped in furs. He didn't look surprised. Before he died. And? Gideon isn't hiding in a cave, Reese, Caleb said, his voice heavy with dread. He's taken the southern citadel, and he has allies. The vampires have broken the treaty. They march with him. Reese went still. I felt the cold fear spike through the bond. Vampires? Reese whispered. They haven't marched in centuries. They are hungry, Caleb said, and Gideon promised them a feast. Reese turned to look at me, his face grim. Then we give them a war. I stood up, clutching the dagger Reese had given me. No, I corrected. We give them a war. Chapter 61. The war room smelled of unwashed bodies, old parchment, and fear. 12 generals stood around the massive oak table, arguing over a map of the southern territories. They were all large, bearded men in heavy armor, their voices booming off the stone walls. I stood in the corner, arms crossed, wearing a leather tunic and trousers Reese had commissioned for me. I looked less like a personal steward and more like a squire, though the star-steel dagger strapped to my thigh suggested otherwise. We must strike head-on, General Kale shouted, slamming a fist onto the map. We have the numbers. We crush the rebellion in the valley. And walk into a slaughter? Countered General Vance. Gideon has vampires. They will flank us from the ridges at night. We need to siege. Sieging takes months, Kale roared. Winter is coming. Enough. Reese's voice cut through the noise like a whip crack. He stood at the head of the table, his face a mask of cold fury. We do not siege. Gideon is occupying the southern citadel. That is my territory. I will not starve my own people to kill a traitor. But the vampires, my king, Vance pressed, sweating. We have not fought their kind in centuries. They are fast. They are immortal. They are arrogant, a voice piped up. The room went dead silent. 12 pairs of eyes snapped to me. Reese turned, his expression softening imperceptibly as it landed on me. Speak, Ilara, he commanded. General Kale scoffed. The human servant has an opinion on war strategy? Reese let out a low, warning growl, but I stepped forward, ignoring the general. I walked to the map. I worked in a tavern near the docks. I served plenty of shady characters, smugglers, mercenaries, and once a man who drank blood from a flask. The generals shifted uncomfortably. I thought he was mad, but he was arrogant. He thought because he was faster and stronger, he was untouchable. He bragged about his nest. He said they hated running water, said it burned them like acid. I pointed to the river that cut through the valley leading to the southern citadel. You want to flank them? Don't use the ridges, use the aqueducts, the old irrigation tunnels. The tunnels are flooded, Vance dismissed. Our wolves cannot fight in waist-deep water. But the vampires won't go near them, I countered, looking him in the eye. If the legends are true, running water is their weakness. If you move your elite units through the tunnels, you can bypass their sentries entirely and pop up right inside the citadel walls. Silence stretched. The generals looked at the map, then at me, then at Reese. Reese looked at the map, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. The girl is right. Gideon will expect us to avoid the water. He will stack his defenses on the high ground. It is a risk, Cale grunted, though he looked at me with grudging respect. If she is wrong, we drown. I'm not wrong, I said, lifting my chin. Bullies always underestimate the quiet ways in. Reese looked at me, pride radiating through the bond so strongly it made my knees weak. Prepare the legions, Reese ordered. We march at dusk. We take the river.
Chapter 62. The courtyard was a hive of activity. Squires sharpened swords, horses stamped nervously, and the air rang with the clash of steel. Reese pulled me aside into the shadow of the stables. He looked magnificent in his black armor, his cloak billowing in the wind, but his eyes were filled with worry. "This is your last chance," he murmured, gripping my shoulders. "Stay here. Caleb can leave a guard." "No," I said, adjusting the strap of my dagger. "Where you go, I go. Besides, who is going to remind you to eat?" He didn't smile. He reached down and unbuckled the dagger from my thigh. "Hey," I protested. "You are wearing it wrong," he said grimly. "If you draw it like that, you'll slice your own leg." He repositioned the sheath, angling it for a cross draw. Then he stood behind me, wrapping his large arms around me, his hands covering mine on the hilt. "Draw," he commanded. I pulled the dagger. It slid out smoothly. Again, faster. We spent an hour there, him drilling me on strikes. Throat, liver, eye. It wasn't a romantic dance. It was a lesson in survival. He was ruthless, correcting my stance with sharp nudges, growling when I hesitated. "Do not hesitate," he barked when I pulled a punch. "They will not hesitate to drain you dry. You strike to kill, Alara, always." "I know," I breathed, sweat trickling down my back. Finally, he stopped. He spun me around, pulling me flush against his steel armor. The hard steel pressed into me, but his kiss was soft, desperate. "Stay close to Caleb," he whispered against my lips. "If the fighting starts, you find a hole and you hide. You do not try to be a hero. You survive. Promise me?" "I promise to try," I said. He sighed, resting his forehead against mine. "That is the best I will get, isn't it?" "Pretty much." A horn blew, a deep, mournful sound that signaled the march. Reese pulled back, his face hardening into the mask of the Alpha King. He lifted me onto a smaller, nimble mare he had selected for me, then mounted his massive black warhorse. "Ride," he roared to the assembled army. As we rode out of the gates, thousands of wolves howling their answer, I felt a thrill of terror and exhilaration. I was riding to war. I was a tavern girl with a knife and a werewolf king. It was the stupidest thing I had ever done, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Chapter 63. The march south took 3 days. We moved mostly at night to mask our numbers, resting in dense forests during the day. The tension in the camp was palpable. The closer we got to the southern citadel, the thicker the air felt, heavy with dark magic. On the third night, we made camp in a valley known as the Whispering Gorge. High cliffs rose on either side, blocking out the moon. I was sitting by a small fire, gnawing on hardtack, while Reese conferred with his scouts. The bond hummed with his agitation. He felt cornered. Suddenly, the horses screamed. It wasn't a normal whinny. It was a sound of pure, primal terror. "Ambush!" Caleb roared from the perimeter. "Above us!" I looked up. The cliffs were swarming.
pale shapes dropped from the darkness like spiders, clinging to the sheer rock faces. Vampires. They moved with unnatural, jerky speed, their eyes glowing red in the darkness. "Shields!" Reese bellowed, shifting mid-stride into his massive wolf form. The vampires hit the ground with the force of boulders. They didn't fight like men, they fought like beasts, tearing into the ranks of the wolf soldiers. Chaos erupted. A vampire landed near me, a creature of gaunt angles and bared fangs. He hissed, lunging for my horse. My mare reared in panic, throwing me. I hit the ground hard, the breath knocked out of me. The vampire was on me in an instant, his hand clawing for my throat. His grip was like ice, freezing my skin. "Fresh blood," he hissed, his mouth opening to reveal needle-sharp teeth. Fear paralyzed me for a split second. Then Reese's voice echoed in my head, "Strike to kill." I didn't try to push him off. I reached down. My hand found the hilt of the dagger. I drove the blade upward, straight under his ribcage, aiming for where a heart should be. The star steel hissed as it pierced the dead flesh. The vampire shrieked, a sound that shattered glass, and recoiled, clutching his chest. I scrambled backward, crab-walking through the mud. "Ilara!" A massive black wolf crashed into the vampire, jaws clamping around the creature's neck. With a savage shake of his head, Reese tore the vampire's head from its shoulders. He stood over me, snarling, blood dripping from his muzzle. "Run," his eyes commanded. "Hide." But there were too many. They were pouring from the cliffs like rain. Chapter 64. The battle was a blur of shadows and screams. Reese was a whirlwind of violence, tearing through the vampires to keep a circle of safety around me. But for every one he killed, two more appeared. Gideon had emptied the crypts. There were hundreds of them. "We are overrun!" Caleb shouted, slashing a vampire in half with his silver-coated sword. "Reese, we need to retreat to the river." "Go!" Reese roared, shifting back to human form for a split second to grab my arm. "To the water. They won't follow." We ran. I stumbled over roots and bodies, my hand locked in Reese's iron grip. The river was close. I could hear the rushing water. But then a wall of fire erupted in front of us. Mages. Gideon had mages too. We skidded to a halt. We were trapped. Fire in front, a cliff behind, and an army of vampires closing in on the sides. "Well," a voice drawled from the darkness, "that was easier than I expected." A figure stepped through the wall of fire, the flames parting around him like obedient pets. He looked like Reese, same dark hair, same broad shoulders, but his eyes weren't gold. They were black, pitch black, devoid of any white. Gideon. He wore armor made of black iron, and he held a staff topped with a glowing red crystal. "Hello, brother." Gideon smiled. It was a cruel, twisted expression. "I see you brought a snack." His gaze landed on me. Reese stepped in front of me, a low, vibrating growl emitting from his chest. "Touch her, Gideon, and I will not kill you quickly this time. I will peel the skin from your bones." "Always so dramatic," Gideon sighed. "You haven't changed. Still letting your emotions rule you. Still keeping pets." Gideon raised his hand. The vampires stopped their attack, forming a circle around us. We were cut off from the rest of the army. Caleb and his men were fighting on the other side of the firewall, unable to reach us. "He doesn't want the throne, Reese," Gideon lied smoothly. "I just want what is mine. You took my birthright. You took my pride." "You sold me to hunters," Reese roared. "And look how strong it made you. Laugh. You should thank me." He pointed the staff at Reese. A beam of dark energy shot out. Reese shoved me aside. "Run!" He took the blast full in the chest. Chapter 65. "Reese!" I screamed. The dark magic hit him with the force of a battering ram. He was thrown backward, crashing into the rock face. He crumpled to the ground, groaning, smoke rising from his armor. I didn't run. I couldn't. I scrambled toward him, my dagger in hand.
I stood over his fallen body, facing Gideon. I knew it was ridiculous, a human woman with a knife against a sorcerer wolf, but I wouldn't let him take Rhys, not again. Gideon looked at me, amused. "Oh, look, the kitten has claws." "Get up, Rhys," I whispered, keeping my eyes on Gideon. "Please get up." Rhys was trying. I could feel his struggle through the bond. Pain, disorientation, rage. But the magic had stunned him. "You possess spirit," Gideon noted, walking closer. "The vampires parted for him. I see why he kept you. But spirit doesn't stop magic." He flicked his wrist. An invisible force slammed into me, pinning my arms to my sides. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I was lifted off the ground, floating, helpless in the air. "Ilara!" Rhys roared, struggling to his knees. His eyes flashed gold, his wolf surfacing, fighting the paralysis. "Stay down, brother," Gideon commanded, "or I snap her neck like a twig." Rhys froze. The threat worked. He sank back, his eyes locked on me, filled with agonizing fear. "That's better," Gideon smiled. He walked over to me, inspecting me like a prize pig at a fair. The human mate, the weakness. He reached out and plucked the star steel dagger from my paralyzed hand. He tossed it aside. "You see, Rhys," Gideon called out, circling me, "you thought you could hide her. You thought you could send her away. But fate is funny. It always brings our sins back to us." He pulled a heavy silver chain from his belt. It was identical to the ones from the fortress. "No," Rhys whispered, his voice broken. "Gideon, take me. Leave her be." "I'll take you both," Gideon corrected. He wrapped the silver chain around my wrists. The metal burned cold against my skin. He whispered a word, and the magical paralysis broke, dropping me to the ground. I tried to run, but the chain was already secure. Gideon yanked it, dragging me to his side. He placed the tip of his staff against my temple. "Surrender, Rhys," Gideon commanded softly. "Shift into your human form. Put on these chains, or I melt her brains right now." I looked at Rhys. "Don't do it," I pleaded, tears streaming down my face. "He'll kill us anyway. Fight, Rhys. Run." Rhys looked at me. He looked at the staff pressed against my head. He looked at the brother he hated. Then, slowly, agonizingly, the fight left his body. The Alpha King bowed his head. "I surrender," he whispered. He held out his hands. Gideon laughed, a sound of pure triumph. Two vampires rushed forward, clamping heavy silver shackles onto Rhys's wrists. He looked at me across the clearing, his eyes conveying a silent, desperate promise. "I will find a way." But as Gideon dragged me toward his black carriage, leaving Rhys surrounded by monsters, I knew the nightmare had started all over again. We were going back to the cage. Chapter 66. The sensation of cold stone against my cheek was a nightmare I thought I had escaped 12 years ago. I woke to the sound of dripping water and the clenching of chains. For a terrifying moment, I was 10 years old again, small and helpless, hiding in the shadows. But then, the pain in my wrists registered, the burning bite of silver cuffs, and I remembered. I wasn't 10. I was 22, and I wasn't hiding. I was captured. "Ilara." The voice was a ragged whisper from the darkness. I pushed myself up. We were in a dungeon cell, damp and smelling of rot. It was nearly identical to the one where we met, only this one was larger, and this time I wasn't the visitor. Rhys was chained to the opposite wall. He looked terrible. Gideon's magic and the silver shackles had drained him. His skin was pale, sweat beading on his forehead, his black hair matted with blood. He was slumped forward, the heavy chains pulling his arms taut above his head. "Rhys?" I croaked, my throat dry. I tried to crawl toward him, but the chain on my ankle jerked me back. I had about 3 feet of movement, just enough to be miserable, not enough to reach him. "I am sorry," he whispered, lifting his head. His golden eyes were dim, filled with an agony that had nothing to do with physical pain. I promised I would keep you safe."
Stop it, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Don't do that. Don't go into the shame spiral. I surrendered, he whispered, staring at his shackles. I gave up. I failed you. You saved me, I corrected. If you hadn't surrendered, Gideon would have popped my head like a grape. I prefer my head unpopped, thank you very much. I sat back against the wall, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. Besides, look at the bright side. At least we're roommates this time. Last time I had to sneak in. Rhys let out a sound that was half growl, half sob. This is not a joke, Ilara. We are in the southern citadel. Gideon holds all the cards. He will use us to force the council to kneel. And then he'll kill us, I finished. I know how villains work, Rhys. They monologue, they gloat, and then they die because they're arrogant. He has vampires and dark magic, and I can't reach my wolf. The silver is too much. I looked at him, my powerful, invincible king, reduced to this broken state. It made my heart ache, but it also lit a fire in my belly. He had fought for me for 12 years. Now it was my turn to be the strong one. You don't need your wolf right now, I said firmly. You have me. He looked at me with tragic tenderness. You are brave, little ghost, but you are chained too. Chains break, I said, looking at the iron cuff on my wrist. We did it once with a file and a rock. We can do it again. We don't have a file, he pointed out. I smiled, a small, wicked thing. No, but we have something better. We have a very angry, very stubborn tavern girl who hates losing. Hours passed in the damp gloom. My stomach rumbled, echoing loudly in the silence. Sorry, I muttered. I skipped dinner to go to a war. Rhys didn't answer. He was drifting in and out of consciousness, the silver poisoning working faster on him because of his high alpha blood. I watched him, fear gnawing at me. If we didn't get out soon, the metal would kill him before Gideon ever got the chance. The heavy iron door groaned open. Torchlight flooded the cell, blinding us. Gideon swept in, followed by two pale, gaunt vampires who looked like they hadn't eaten in a century. Gideon looked pristine in his black armor, his face a smug mask of victory. Cozy, he sneered, looking between us. It's almost poetic, isn't it? The Alpha and his human pet back in the dirt where they belong. Rhys lifted his head, a low growl rumbling in his chest, but he was too weak to do more. Save your breath, brother, Gideon laughed. He walked over to me, crouching down so we were eye level. He smelled of ozone and dried blood. And you, the famous Ilara. I expected more. You look like a street rat. I stared at him, keeping my face blank. And you look like a second-rate sorcerer who bought his outfit at a costume shop. Seriously, black spikes? It's a bit predictable, isn't it? The vampires hissed. Gideon blinked, his smile faltering for a second. You have a sharp tongue, he noted, his eyes narrowing. It helps when dealing with pests, I replied sweetly. Gideon stood up, his face hardening. Enjoy your wit while you can. At dawn, I will bring you out to the courtyard. I will drain Rhys of his power in front of his army, and then I will feed you to my new friends here. He gestured to the vampires. Slowly. Rhys surged against his chains, the metal shrieking. You touch her, and You will do nothing, Gideon shouted, kicking Rhys in the ribs. Rhys collapsed with a grunt of pain. Stop, I yelled, lunging forward as far as my chain allowed. Gideon turned back to me, straightening his cloak. Tomorrow, the north falls, and you two will be nothing but a cautionary tale. He turned and swept out, the vampires following. The door slammed shut, plunging us back into darkness. I am going to kill him, Rhys wheezed from the floor. I am going to tear him apart. Get in line, I muttered. I waited until the footsteps faded completely. Then I turned my attention to my left wrist. Rhys, I whispered, are you awake? Barely, he groaned. Good, stay awake, because I need you to make noise. What? Commanded. Make noise. Groan, rattle your chains, sing a song, just cover the sound of what I'm about to do. What are you about to do? I reached up to my hair. My messy, tangled bun was held together by 3 pins. 2 were wood, but one was the long, sturdy iron pin I had used to pick the lock on his solar door. Gideon, in his arrogance, had disarmed me of the dagger, but he hadn't checked my hair. I pulled the pin out, holding it up in the dim light. I'm going to break us out of here. Chapter 68. You kept the pin, Reese whispered, a note of awe in his voice. I'm a hoarder, I whispered back. Now make noise. Reese understood. He began to growl, a low, rhythmic sound of pain and rage. He yanked on his chains, the heavy iron clanking against the stone wall. It was a convincing performance of a dying beast. Meanwhile, I went to work on my ankle shackle. The lock was old and rusted. Gideon hadn't bothered to update the dungeon security. He relied too much on the silver and his magic. He underestimated the power of simple mechanics. I slid the iron pin into the keyhole. It was tricky. My hands were shaking from hunger and cold. Click. I felt the first tumbler give. Keep going, Reese, I murmured, tongue between my teeth. How is it going? He grunted, slamming his shoulder against the wall. Almost got it. The pin slipped. I cursed quietly, readjusting. I closed my eyes, visualizing the mechanism. I had picked dozens of locks in the lower district, doors to warm cellars, pantries with food. Survival had taught me skills no lady should have. Snap. The latch clicked open. I nearly sobbed with relief. I pulled my foot free. I quickly undid the wrist cuff, much easier now that I had 2 hands. I was free. I crept across the cell to Reese. He looked down at me, his eyes wide. You did it, he breathed. Told you, I whispered. Now hold still. I worked on his wrist cuffs. These were heavier, newer. My pin bent slightly under the strain. Come on, I pleaded with the metal. Don't break, please don't break. Reese watched me, his gaze intense. If we get out of here, he whispered, I am buying you a locksmith shop. I'd prefer a bakery, I grunted, twisting the pin. Less stress. Clank. His right hand came free. He immediately caught me as I stumbled back, his large hand cupping my face. One more, he urged. I attacked the left cuff. It popped open in seconds. Reese fell forward, catching himself on his hands and knees. He took deep, shuddering breaths. Without the direct contact of the silver, his healing factor began to kick in immediately. I could actually see the color returning to his skin, the wounds on his chest knitting together. He stood up, rolling his shoulders. He cracked his neck. The aura of the Alpha King flickered back to life, dim, but there. Can you shift? I asked. He shook his head. Not yet. The silver poison is still in my blood. I am just a man tonight, Alara. A man is enough, I said, grabbing his hand. Now let's get out of here before Count Dracula comes back for a snack. We moved to the cell door. It was locked from the outside, obviously. Step back, Reese whispered. He didn't use magic. He didn't use a key. He used brute alpha strength. He placed his boot near the lock mechanism and kicked. Once, twice. On the third kick, the rusted wood splintered and the lock gave way. We stepped out into the corridor. It was empty. We need weapons, Reese whispered, looking around. And a map, I added. I know this citadel, Reese said grimly. I grew up here before my father moved the capital north. I know where Gideon will be. We're not going after Gideon, I hissed. We're escaping. No, Reese said, turning to me. His eyes were hard. If we leave, he hunts us. He kills my army. The only way this ends is if I end him. But you can't shift. I don't need to be a wolf to kill my brother, he vowed. I just need a sword. Chapter 69. We moved through the shadows of the citadel like ghosts. Reese moved with a silent, deadly grace, leading the way. I followed close behind, clutching my iron pin like a tiny dagger. The citadel was eerily quiet. Most of Gideon's forces, the vampires and the traitor wolves, were likely on the walls, watching for the arrival of Reese's army. They didn't expect the threat to be inside the house. We found an armory near the barracks. It was unguarded. Reese grabbed a heavy broadsword, testing its weight. He tossed me a short sword. Too heavy, I whispered, nearly dropping it. He found a pair of long daggers. Better? Much. I tucked them into my belt. Now I feel like a real steward. We need to get to the courtyard gate, Reese whispered. The army, if they survived the ambush, they will be regrouping at the river. If we can open the main gates, we can let them in. I thought we were killing Gideon. We are, Reese said, but I can't take on an army of vampires alone. We need Caleb. We crept toward the main courtyard. As we passed the great hall, voices drifted out. Smell them on the wind. The Northern Legion is massing at the aqueducts. We froze. Gideon was in the hall. Let them come, Gideon's voice sneered. I have the king. When they see his head on a pike, they will scatter. Reese gripped the hilt of his sword, his knuckles white. I put a hand on his arm to steady him. We reached the archway overlooking the courtyard. It was packed. Hundreds of vampires stood in formation, waiting. The gate was barred with a massive beam of ironwood. There's too many, I whispered. We can't fight through that. We don't have to, Reese said, pointing upward. Look. Above the gate was the winch mechanism room. If we could get there, we could raise the portcullis. The aqueducts, I realized, remembering my plan from the war room. Caleb used the tunnels. They're probably waiting right outside the gate, underwater, waiting for the signal. Then let's give them one, Reese said. We climbed the spiral stairs to the gatehouse. 2 vampires stood guard at the top. Reese didn't hesitate. He lunged, his sword flashing in the moonlight. He decapitated the first one before the creature could scream. The second hissed, lunging for me. I dodged, ducking under its clawed hand. I drove my dagger into its stomach, then twisted. It shrieked and dissolved into ash, ancient dust held together by magic. Nice aim, Reese grunted, kicking the dust pile aside. We burst into the winch room. It was empty. Reese grabbed the massive wheel that controlled the gate. It's stuck, he grunted, straining against it. Rusted shut. Use your back, I urged, grabbing the spokes to help him. I am. Suddenly, the door behind us blew open. Gideon stood there, flanked by 3 massive vampires. His staff glowed with red light. I knew I smelled a rat, or rather, a wolf and his mouse. Reese stepped in front of me, raising his sword. It's over, Gideon. Is it? Gideon laughed. You have no wolf. You have no army. You have a rusty sword and a girl. He raised his staff. Say goodbye, brother.
Chapter 70. Drop! Reese roared. He tackled me to the ground just as a bolt of dark energy shattered the winch mechanism above our heads. Wood and iron rained down on us. Reese rolled to his feet, placing himself between me and Gideon. Alara, get the gate open, he shouted. I'll hold them off. The mechanism is broken, I yelled back, scrambling up. Find a way. Reese charged. He was a blur of steel and fury. He met the 3 vampires head on. Without his wolf strength, he relied on skill, 12 years of training, of fighting, of surviving. He parried a claw swipe, ducked a bite, and drove his sword through the chest of the first attacker. But Gideon stood back, launching blasts of magic. One hit Reese in the shoulder, spinning him around. He stumbled but stayed on his feet. I looked frantically at the gate controls. The chain was intact, but the wheel was shattered. The counterweight was locked in place by a heavy iron pin. If I could knock that pin out, gravity would do the rest. The gate would crash up. I looked around for something heavy, a hammer, a rock, anything. Nothing. I looked at the fight. Reese was struggling. He was bleeding from a dozen cuts. Gideon was laughing, toying with him. You are weak, Reese, Gideon taunted, blasting him again. You were always weak. I saw a heavy iron torch sconce on the wall. I grabbed it, wrenching it free with a grunt of effort. I ran to the counterweight mechanism. I climbed up the gears, ignoring the grease and the height. I straddled the chain. Hey, wizard boy, I screamed. Gideon looked up, annoyed. What? Gravity is unforgiving. I swung the iron sconce with all my might, smashing it into the locking pin. Clang! It didn't budge. Ilara! Reese shouted, deflecting a blow that would have taken his head off.
I swung again. Clang! The pin wiggled. Gideon realized what I was doing. "Stop her!" he shrieked at the remaining vampire. The creature abandoned Reese and leaped up the wall, clawing its way toward me like a spider. I swung a third time. I put every ounce of my rage, my fear, and my love into it. Crack! The pin flew out. The counterweight dropped like a stone. The chain screamed as it whirred through the gears. Below, in the courtyard, the massive iron gate began to rise with a thunderous groan. The vampire lunged at me. I let go of the chain and dropped to the floor, rolling away. The creature landed where I had been a second before. Through the open gate, a sound reached us, a roar of water and fury. From the river outside, hundreds of wolves, wet, angry, and heavily armored, surged into the courtyard. Caleb was at the front, his sword raised. "For the king!" Caleb bellowed. The Northern Legion had arrived. Reese looked at Gideon, blood dripping from his nose, a savage grin spreading across his face. "You were saying, brother?" Gideon's face went pale. He turned to run, but the door to the stairs was blocked by the vampire I had dodged. I stood up, dusting off my hands. "Now," I said to the terrified sorcerer, "let's talk about that monologue you never got to finish."